American comic. I have all the skills from Warcraft 3. Chapter 21. The one who beheaded Purple Man with a single strike was, without a doubt, Rosen, who arrived just in time, wielding his moon blade. At this moment, he was marveling at his timely arrival, otherwise, Jessica would have almost been exposed to that dog of a Purple Man. It was also due to his urgency that Rosen did not hesitate when dealing with Purple Man. The divine shield he had prepared was unnecessary. Purple Man, completely unprepared, was directly beheaded by Rosen, who had flashed next to him, inheriting the legacy of Louis XVI. Perhaps it was because he had already mentally prepared himself for killing after transmigrating to this world. Or perhaps there were violent tendencies within him. After killing Purple Man, Rosen felt no discomfort, instead, he was filled with a sense of excitement. It was Jessica's actions that startled him. Luckily, his reaction was quick, or he might have almost sent Jessica away with a backhand moon blade. Don't worry, it's over. Rosen put away his moon blade, comforting Jessica in his arms, and then looked at Purple Man's corpse, feeling a slight regret. Because he had rushed over, he had forgotten to put on his death mask. It was a waste of this guy's life force. This guy was a superhuman, so his life force should have been considerable. What a pity. However, Rosen quickly lost the thought of regretting the lost life force. The smooth touch on his hand and the alluring rubbing of the beauty in his arms soon made Rosen's mind wander. Neither Rosen in his previous life nor the original Rosen was a virgin. Although he hadn't married in his previous life, he had dated a few girlfriends. And due to the nature of his work, he had experienced the prosperity of the modern world during activities like entertaining clients. As for the original Rosen, although young, this was the US, and he had tasted the forbidden fruit early on, so he wasn't inexperienced. However, after Rosen transmigrated, he was engrossed in making money for the system, improving his strength, researching engineering, and a series of other things. He hadn't thought about matters between men and women in the short term. But now, influenced by Jessica, a significant change immediately occurred. After sensing this change, Jessica also cooperated with Rosen. Although Jessica, in this world, with Rosen's help, avoided the destined calamity of Purple Man and was not corrupted. She was an adult after all. Even if she hadn't eaten pork, she had seen pigs run, right? Her cooperation with Rosen, though clumsy, was very earnest in attitude. Jessica's performance also made Rosen very satisfied. This showed that his efforts were not in vain. At this time, even in the United States, the social atmosphere was still relatively good, not as murky as later on. However, the timing was not right now. He hadn't forgotten that there was still a corpse lying in the room and a bloody scene caused by Jessica in the adjacent building. So, he forced himself to push Jessica away, making her sober up as well. They were not Purple Man, possessing the ability to forcibly control people. If they didn't clean up the crime scene in time, it would be very troublesome for them once discovered. After Jessica got dressed, the two spent a lot of effort to clean up all traces and transferred Purple Man's body to the adjacent building. Unlike the building where Purple Man died, the adjacent building where Jessica had previously gone on a rampage was originally a gang stronghold, and after Jessica killed those gang members, it was already deserted. Jessica went there initially not because Purple Man controlled her. Instead, during this time, while investigating the car accident from back then, she somehow got targeted by them. But obviously, facing Jessica, who possessed superpowers, those gang members were unable to harm her. Instead, she stormed their hideout. However, she initially had no intention of killing anyone. She just wanted to interrogate those guys about why they attacked her. It was during this process that Purple Man appeared and controlled Jessica, killing everyone in the building. However, it was precisely because everyone in this building had died. It made it convenient for Rosen to destroy the evidence. After moving Purple Man's body over, he directly set a fire. Skill: Flame Storm, Level 2. The effect of this skill is largely consistent with the game. It causes massive fire damage within a certain area. However, in the real world, Flame Storm does not have a fixed damage value, nor does it immediately extinguish after the skill ends. Instead, at its initial burst, it forms a pillar of flame with a temperature of 2000 degrees within the area. After that, it becomes a natural fire, depending on the specific conditions of the ignitable materials within the skill's range. And the damage value increase from skill level up has been replaced by an increase in skill range. The three levels are a radius of 20, 40, 80, respectively. However, this range is not fixed, it's an upper limit. Below this upper limit, Rosen can freely control the affected area of this skill. Of course, this range is limited only to the initial pillar of flame. As for whether the fire will spread afterward, that depends on the ignitable materials. So, with the skill's activation, a huge pillar of fire engulfed the entire building. Is this magic? It's simply astonishing. Jessica was stunned, looking at the huge pillar of fire. She originally thought her abilities were already very powerful. But compared to Rosen's performance, they were nothing. She didn't think she could withstand such terrifying flame. As the flame ascended, police sirens soon sounded in the distance. Rosen also quickly left the scene with Jessica, directly using a town portal scroll to bring her back to his apartment. The town portal scroll was inherently a group spell, only requiring Rosen to pre-mark allies. Anyway, Rosen's identity in front of Jessica was already that of a magician. Isn't it normal to have a teleportation spell? And when the two returned to the apartment, before Rosen could even react, Jessica immediately pounced on him. Rosen, having dealt with his worries, naturally wouldn't refuse. In all fairness, Jessica Jones's appearance in Marvel is not particularly outstanding, and her figure can only be considered average. But her skin was truly fair and tender. More importantly, at 175 centimeters tall, she possessed a pair of long legs that many Marvel beauties, such as Black Widow and Wanda, could not match. With both of them being superhumans, possessing extremely powerful physical qualities, there was no restraint whatsoever in the ensuing battle, which truly lasted an entire night. It was also fortunate that Rosen's apartment was luxurious and of good quality. So, there were no embarrassing scenes like collapses. You're saying the people who transported the super soldier serum that time were from the Air Force. Inside the apartment, the lingering effects of the battle had yet to dissipate as Rosen asked Jessica, who was in his arms. That's right. I found the police who handled the matter back then, and my initial investigation uncovered some truth about the incident. The chemical truck's source was indeed a research institute belonging to the Army, but the driver and escorts responsible for the transport were from the Air Force. Jessica slowly recounted the results of her investigation over the past few days. Air Force. Hearing Jessica's words, Rosen looked thoughtful. The time Jessica's family had an accident, the birth of the Hulk, and Bronski's involvement in the pursuit and injection of the super soldier serum were all very close. Moreover, the incidents all occurred in California. So Rosen found it hard not to connect the cause of the events to General Ross, who was in charge of the super soldier program. Bruce Banner's research project was originally an extension of the super soldier program. It was just that the unexpected factor of gamma rays appeared during this process. That's how the freakish Hulk came into being. As for what Bronski injected, it was an early, failed, version of the super soldier serum that had been sealed away, with significant side effects. The surviving black super soldier who appeared in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier might have used this version of the super soldier serum. If this were the comic universe, and General Ross was an Air Force lieutenant general, then Rosen's suspicions would be perfectly reasonable. But the problem is that in the cinematic universe, General Ross is an Army lieutenant general. That changes the situation entirely. Although both are high-ranking military generals. It's like the famous discord between the Japanese during World War II. The competition between the four U.S. military branches is equally fierce, with numerous conflicts. First, Air Force, second, Navy, third, Army, fourth, Marines. It's not just an empty saying. So, under normal circumstances, General Ross, a high-ranking Army general, would not actively cooperate with people from the Air Force. But now, Jessica said that the people who transported the serum were from the Air Force. This is very thought-provoking. In Rosen's view, there are two possibilities. One is that the Army and the Air Force cooperated on the super soldier program. But this possibility is extremely low. Given General Ross's extremely proud personality, it's more likely he would abandon the super soldier program than cooperate with other military branches. The second is that the vehicle carrying the serum was stolen by Air Force personnel from the Army Research Institute. It's even hard to say whether those Air Force personnel were truly Air Force. As for who it really is, it's really hard to guess. What do you say, General Hale? Indeed, after analyzing the information Jessica found, Rosen immediately shifted his suspicion from General Ross to Hydra. And this also makes perfect sense. After all, Hydra's hidden agents are spread throughout the United States high-level government. Upon learning that General Ross had restarted the Super Soldier program, allowed Bronski to inject the early Super Soldier serum, and that Bronski was unharmed, it's highly probable they would want to acquire this batch of Super Soldier serum. Moreover, using gangs to deal with Jessica also aligns with Hydra's modus operandi. Don't look at how in the movies, when Hydra targets Captain America, they always use their own official power. Their style of action seems even more official than the official government. But that's because of Captain America's own strength and standing. Using underworld forces to target Captain America. That would be insane. But Jessica is different. After all, according to Rosen and Jessica's conversation, before yesterday's incident, Jessica had not publicly revealed that she possessed superpowers. So, before yesterday, in HYDRA's files, she was just an ordinary high school student. In this situation, using official power to target Jessica would be completely unnecessary. However, after tomorrow, what you'll be facing won't be ordinary gangs, Rosen said to Jessica. Why? Haven't we already cleaned up all the clues? Jessica asked innocently. Rosen was speechless at her words. It's quite impressive that such an innocent person like her could actually uncover some clues. But he spoils his own woman. We only cleaned up the clues from the murder scene yesterday, but since the other party sent gangs to attack you, it means they already know about your investigation. And considering the deaths of those people, do you think they won't be able to find you? Rosen retorted. Or do you think that for those people, doing things requires evidence? Jessica was stunned by his words. Oh, right. She did wipe out that gang stronghold, but the person who instructed the gang to attack her was someone else entirely. HMPH, let them come, I'm not afraid of them. Jessica said with a fierce but cute tone. Evidently, after escaping the unpleasant experience of being controlled by the Purple Man and almost becoming a weapon yesterday. Single-handedly clearing out an entire gang stronghold was clearly a proud achievement for the fledgling Jessica. Of course, it also showed Rosen that this young girl didn't have a sufficient concept of what a true national machine was. You don't really think that after an entire gang is annihilated, the people behind it will still deal with you in the same way they deal with ordinary people, do you? Rosen said helplessly. Do you think you can withstand sniper rifles or rocket launchers? Facing the encirclement of countless police and military, how long do you think you can last? Do you think you're the Hulk? Rosen's words were like a basin of cold water poured over Jessica's head. Her superpowers were indeed not weak. Super strength, super speed, and quite formidable defenses made her invincible when facing even those gang members armed with firearms. But the gangs yesterday only used pistols. Although she withstood them all, close-range shots actually almost broke through her defenses. It's just that her recovery ability was equally strong, so it wasn't very noticeable. But what if it were large-caliber rifles, machine guns, or even rocket launchers? Then what should I do? Jessica asked Rosen, feeling a bit helpless. She seemed to already envision herself surrounded by countless military and police personnel. Put the investigation aside for now. Didn't you want to be a superhero before? Well, for this period of time, you'll be a superhero, and the bigger the commotion, the better. Rosen pondered for a moment before offering Jessica an idea. Besides, your combat skills are still lacking. You're fighting purely with brute force, especially when it comes to things you don't understand. Your defensive capabilities are too poor. So, during the time you're being a superhero, I will also give you special training and provide you with necessary logistical supplies. Don't think that Rosen's combat experience is not extensive, that doesn't mean his combat skills are poor. Because the Watcher panel he obtained didn't just contain attributes. It also included the Watcher's combat skills. It's definitely enough to guide Jessica, who is completely a white in this aspect. As for having Jessica become a superhero and gain fame, it's because Rosen wants her to attract the attention of S.H.I.E.L.D., cooperate with them, and then join the Avengers. Although Rosen himself has no intention of joining S.H.I.E.L.D. or the Avengers, that doesn't mean he can't insert a wedge. Moreover, cooperating with S.H.I.E.L.D. can also make Hydra hesitate in the short term, temporarily abandoning targeting Jessica. "I'll listen to you." Although she still didn't quite understand Rosen's suggestion, Jessica obediently agreed. And she truly had a dream of becoming a superhero. The next day, Jessica spent a generous £10 million to buy a luxurious mansion in Midtown Manhattan, near Hell's Kitchen. The money, of course, was given by Rosen. Previously, Rosen had plundered tens of millions of pounds, euros, and other currencies from Britain. Since they couldn't be used for system top-ups and he didn't want to expose his situation, he hadn't touched them. So, he gave most of it to Jessica and had her buy this mansion. As for whether Jessica would be investigated for this huge sum of money from an unknown source, Rosen wasn't worried. Because Rosen's next goal was to have Jessica, as a superhero, expose herself to the entire United States, attracting the attention of S.H.I.E.L.D. And as a superhero, isn't it normal for Jessica to acquire some ill-gotten gains while fighting evil forces? Fighting dark forces and contributing to the people of New York, isn't it only right for Jessica to enjoy herself? Surely, one can't expect every superhero to be as pure and selfless as a certain little spider, right? After all, superheroes also need to eat and live. And when S.H.I.E.L.D. comes knocking to recruit Jessica, this bit of money will be even less of an issue. With S.H.I.E.L.D. backing her, this money will be as clean as can be. That's right, Rosen was cultivating Jessica into a superhero, while also treating her as a money laundering machine. And after Jessica moved into the mansion, Rosen also moved in with her. It was just in secret. His entry and exit were like before, using flash or gale step, so outsiders couldn't detect him at all. And this place, while Jessica's home, would also be Rosen's secret base from now on. He had been worrying about where to put the large amount of gold and other valuables he had stolen. Now, he put everything into the small vault in the mansion, clearing out the entire system space. It's so comfortable. I never dreamed that one day I would live in such a luxurious house. Inside her new home, Jessica held a cup of hot coffee, curled up lazily on the sofa, and sighed. Her original family background was good, but only that of ordinary middle class. She had never experienced the life of the wealthy. As for the Jones family who adopted her after the car accident, there's even less to say, they were not as well off as her original family. But now, she had become the master of a house that her father couldn't afford even if he worked for hundreds of years. Of course, the now prosperous Jessica didn't forget that family. When she moved, she left them a sum of money. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough for the Jones family to improve their lives. If she gave too much, it might attract unnecessary trouble. All in all, the experiences of this period had been quite surreal for her, always feeling a bit unreal. But thinking of Rosen's identity as a magician, she found it quite normal again. Just as Jessica was lost in thought, Rosen's figure appeared in the living room. "You're back." Jessica immediately went to greet him happily. "Yes, your uniform is ready, and I've also prepared some other equipment for you," Rosen said with a smile, shaking the suitcase in his hand. "Oh, I can't wait." Jessica's eyes lit up at the news. Seeing this, Rosen didn't keep her in suspense and opened the suitcase. The first thing that appeared before Jessica was a blue, form-fitting jumpsuit, and on the back, there was a cape with the same color scheme as the US flag. If a fellow countryman from Rosen's previous world saw this uniform, they would surely recognize it. Isn't this Homelander's battle suit? Yes, that's right, the battle suit Rosen prepared for Jessica was made according to Homelander's uniform from the boys. It looks quite imposing, a bit like Superman's battle suit, but why is the cape the national flag? Jessica asked curiously. In this world, there are DC comics, so it wasn't strange for Jessica to know Superman. However, the boys did not exist. Because starting today, you are Homelander, no, Homelander, so of course, you have to be patriotic. Rosen said with a peculiar smile. Homelander. That doesn't sound good. I originally wanted to be called Jewel Woman. And patriotism. Hee hee. Jessica said, slightly dissatisfied. Ever since she learned that the car accident was not her father's fault, and about the darkness behind it, she hadn't felt much love for this country. Jessica, I naturally understand your thoughts, but since you live in this country and plan to become a superhero, some superficial work is still very necessary. Don't worry too much about it, it's just a title and a cape, Rosen consoled her. Jessica nodded at his words, not dwelling too much on these details. Homelander it was. Then she turned her gaze to the other items in the box. What are these? Jessica asked, picking up an ancient-looking bracer. There were 2 such bracers. Besides these, there was also a golden belt inlaid with rubies in the box. A magnificent crown. A pair of gloves and a necklace. This bracer is called the Rune Bracer. It can increase your resistance to magic and other energy attacks, so you won't be completely defenseless when facing ordinary magic users or opponents skilled in energy attacks, Rosen explained. The gloves are called gauntlets of strength. They can increase the strength of approximately 1 adult. For you, the increase isn't actually significant, but their defensive capabilities are also good. Generally, knives, guns, and fire can't cause damage to them, which can provide you with a lot of help. This belt is called the Belt of Strength. It can increase the strength of 2 adults. Other than that, it's similar to the gloves, but it looks quite good, so it's a nice decoration. The crown is called the Crown of the King, and it can comprehensively boost many physical attributes. The necklace is called the Amulet of Magic Shield. It can provide a magic shield every 40 seconds to help you block one magic or energy attack. These shoes are called Boots of Speed. They can make you run faster. These items were, without a doubt, all from Rosen's shop. Because their attributes were relatively ordinary, they weren't like the top-tier items such as the Skull of Gul'dan that were difficult to acquire. They were basically permanent type equipment. The prices were also not high, generally between several $100,000 and $1 million. These few pieces of equipment wouldn't cost much in total. But they could provide great help to the fledgling Jessica. Roar, 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 Rosen, look, I can fly. In the training room, which was converted from a gym in their new home, Jessica was freely moving around the not-so-spacious area at a speed not much faster than running. Yes, she could fly. If it had followed Jessica's original trajectory, it would have taken her many more years to discover that she could fly and master this ability. But Rosen, as a transmigrator, knew this. So, under his continuous hypnotic indoctrination, Jessica truly grasped the ability to fly. Although her flight was still unstable and slow, it was still flying. How many in the Avengers can fly on their own? Yes, you can finally fly, this is something to be happy about. Rosen said with emotion, his tone mixed with a hint of envy. Although the skills of the Warcraft heroes were varied and each had strong functionality, there wasn't one that allowed a person to fly on their own. Come on, Rosen, fly with me. An excited Jessica invited Rosen. Apparently, she hadn't noticed Rosen's envy, and she didn't even know that Rosen actually couldn't fly. Because in her opinion, if Rosen could teach her to fly, then he must be able to fly too. She completely ignored the fact that Rosen had never personally demonstrated it during the process of teaching her. Ahem, no, now that you've learned to fly, it's time for you to start acting as a superhero and get out there. Rosen cleared his throat, ignored Jessica's invitation, and abruptly changed the subject. Being a superhero isn't that urgent, and my flying isn't proficient yet, come and practice with me a bit more. Jessica landed from midair and whined, pulling Rosen. You can practice by yourself. Are you hungry? I'll go make you a bowl of noodles. Rosen said, his eyes darting around. No matter how slow Jessica was, she now sensed that Rosen's attitude was a bit off. Wait, Rosen, you can't actually fly, can you? Aren't you a magician? Jessica asked in surprise. Who says a magician must be able to fly? Some mages only know a single light spell. Flying isn't that important to me anyway. You know I can teleport and blink, what's the use of flying? Rosen said indifferently. So, you really can't fly. Jessica looked at Rosen at this moment as if she were looking at a certain red giant beast. I can be invisible, I can cast flame storm. You can't fly. I can summon a water elemental, summon a giant bear. You can't fly. I can create various machines. You can't fly. You're asking for a beating. Finally, Rosen, exasperated, grabbed Jessica, pinned her to the ground, and gave her a good beating. Ah, you don't fly, I fly. Late at night, on a rooftop in Hell's Kitchen. Rosen and Jessica, who was wearing a Homelander battle suit and a Catwoman eye mask, Anne Hathaway's version from The Dark Knight, stood side by side. It could be said that this eye mask seemed to conceal her appearance, but in fact, with modern technology, a simple facial analysis could restore her original look. However, Rosen wanted precisely this effect. Otherwise, if her appearance was completely covered, it would be troublesome for the other party to find her, wouldn't it? Below them were two groups of drug dealers making a deal. Go ahead, I don't think I need to teach you how to do it, do I? Rosen said. Of course, leave it to me. Jessica confidently floated up and then quickly flew down towards them. Her flying speed was much faster than when she first mastered flying. However, this wasn't because her flying proficiency had improved much in such a short time. It was because she was wearing the boots of speed. That's right, it was only after Jessica put on the boots of speed that Rosen realized he had underestimated the effect of this seemingly ordinary equipment. Because this equipment, which increases movement speed, didn't just increase ground movement speed, it also increased flying speed. That's right, it originally increased movement speed, not running speed. How is flying not moving? With this boost, Jessica's original swimming-like flying speed directly transformed into the speed of a car traveling at medium speed. The boots of speed in the game increase movement speed by 60 points. And in the real world, it directly translated to an increase of 60 kilometers per hour. Although it was still less than a fraction of Homelander's true flying speed, Mach 1.5. But for Jessica, this kind of flying was already very practical, not like when she first started, a pure aerial target. Hey, guys, good evening, it's getting late, you should go to bed. Jessica shouted as she landed between the two groups, then directly snapped the necks of the two people in charge of the transaction. They slept very peacefully. Actually, according to her own idea, she should have floated in the air first, given an opening speech, and shown off in front of everyone. But this idea was rejected by Rosen. Showing off in front of people is for when facing ordinary citizens. What's the use for a group of doomed gangsters? To make them die more clearly. Although it was decided to make Jessica a superhero, there was no intention of making her adhere to any no-kill principle. Anyway, the Avengers weren't too particular about this aspect. Something that might surprise many people is that among the 6 original Avengers members, before the Battle of New York, the one who killed the fewest people was Hulk, who was listed as the most dangerous member. Facing the sudden appearance of Jessica, the gangsters, already highly tense due to the deal, immediately opened fire. But Jessica's speed on the ground was much faster than in the air. Most of the bullets simply couldn't hit her. Even if a few hit, they generally couldn't break her defense. In just a few minutes, Jessica had cleared out the dozen or so people from both sides of the deal. Perhaps having already experienced a gang being massacred by the Purple Man's controller before. Jessica was now completely immune to killing. She acted very cleanly and efficiently. Rosen, hidden nearby, was also not idle. He was using Gale Step, wearing a death mask, silently finishing off the lucky ones who were knocked down by Jessica but not immediately killed, and at the same time absorbing their life energy. However, what made Rosen slightly dissatisfied was that the life force of these ordinary gang members combined was not even as much as Purple Man's alone. Clearly, even though he only possessed the ability to control people and his physical qualities were similar to ordinary people, Purple Man's life level still surpassed that of ordinary people. First mission, complete success. Jessica, having finished everything, carried 2 boxes and excitedly came before Rosen to claim credit. Well done, this is just the beginning, and as a superhero, just fighting evil isn't enough. Rosen encouraged her. He then put away the box containing money, and the box containing drugs was thrown aside, then a small flame storm burned it clean. Normally, open-air burning of drugs is not feasible, but that's mainly because the temperature of conventional flames is too low. Flames ignited normally in the open air are only a few hundred degrees. This level of temperature cannot quickly decompose drugs, but rather causes them to volatilize into the air, making people within a few kilometers high. But the temperature of flame storm is 2000 degrees, a high temperature that many high-temperature incinerators cannot reach, enough to completely decompose the drugs in an instant. Rosen only dared to do this after specifically researching it. Inside a high-tech office, a projector was showing the news. The news was about a recent fire in New York. On screen, firefighters, who hadn't yet started slacking off due to unfair treatment and societal changes, were working hard to rescue people. However, the fire was too intense, and many people were still trapped inside the building. At this critical moment, a graceful figure draped in a national flag descended from the sky and rushed directly into the burning high-rise. It was Homelander, the superhero who had recently risen in New York. Not long after, Homelander emerged, carrying a child, and handed him over to the firefighters on the ground. After several such trips, over a dozen people trapped in the building were successfully rescued. Of course, due to gender, the treatment of those rescued differed slightly. If it was a child or a female, they were carried out. Males, however, were dragged out by their collars. But it was clear that the surrounding crowd didn't care about this small detail. They only knew that this person had saved over a dozen lives. And she was a female. Wasn't it normal for her to keep her distance from males? Almost everyone spontaneously applauded and cheered for her. The cheers for the hero were endless. No, 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 I'm just doing what I can, and you, my friends, are the true heroes. Homelander showed no pride despite the cheers from the onlookers, but instead humbly gave credit to the hard-working firefighters. Her words once again sparked cheers from the crowd and touched the firefighters. Afterwards, Homelander even very gently took photos with the firefighters and some of the public. Homelander is truly too gentle, thank God for our guardian angel. The scene changed, and a member of the public who had just taken a photo with Homelander was interviewed by a reporter, tears streaming down his face with excitement. The only slightly discordant element in the scene was a group of police standing in the distance, looking awkwardly at Homelander interacting with the public, unsure of what to do. Because unlike the public who only saw Homelander saving people, the police had already investigated Homelander's slaughter of gangs on more than one occasion. Although she only killed gang members, for federal law, Homelander was a genuine lawbreaker. However, due to Homelander's various rescues, and her being a female who was very approachable, her public image was excellent. Even the media rarely spoke ill of Homelander. Because Homelander, other than not revealing her identity, was generally very cooperative with media interviews, always providing plenty of news material. Unlike a certain little spider, who only took photos of himself and only allowed himself to be interviewed. And it was precisely for this reason. If the police tried to arrest her, they would inevitably be surrounded by the public. After many such incidents, whenever Homelander appeared, they could only do as they were doing now, show up as police and do nothing. Finally, the projector screen paused on a photo of Homelander with a firefighter. At the same time, another photo and corresponding information appeared on the projector. The person in the photo and information was Jessica Jones. Jessica Jones, originally a 9th grader at Hamilton Middle School in Brooklyn, later her entire family perished in a car accident 2 years ago, leaving only her alive, and she remained in a coma for over half a year. After waking up, she was adopted by the Jones family, transferred to Midtown High School in Manhattan, where she is now a 10th grader. A month ago, she first appeared as Homelander, eradicating a gang transaction. In the past month, she has eradicated 4 gangs, disrupted 12 underground transactions, resolved 25 safety incidents, and saved over 200 people. In terms of abilities, according to available data, she possesses superhuman strength, speed, and body defense capable of withstanding at least small-caliber rifle fire, and she can fly. According to calculations, her flight speed is around 60 miles per hour. Her attitude towards ordinary civilians is very gentle, with no reported incidents of harm to date. However, she is ruthless towards gang members and criminals. For petty theft and $0 shopping, she generally only breaks hands and feet, but if serious crimes like human trafficking or drug dealing are involved, there are usually no survivors. The number of criminals who have died by her hand has reached over 200, almost as many as the people she has saved. However, overall, there are not too many antisocial tendencies, and her actions are very rational. The overall threat level is assessed as C. As the screen paused, a female voice began to provide a relatively comprehensive narration and analysis of Jessica's data. The speaker was a young female in uniform, full of spirit. If Rosen were here, he would immediately recognize her as Maria Hill, a senior agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Director Nick Fury's deputy. Has the source of her abilities been analyzed? After the female voice finished speaking, a deep male voice asked. At the same time, a bald man with a dark complexion also rose from his armchair and asked. It was Nick Fury, Marvel's top agent. Clearly, just as Rosen had predicted, Jessica had not been acting as a superhero for long before she attracted the attention of S.H.I.E.L.D. Of course, this was mainly due to Jessica's overly high-profile actions. According to our investigation, the source of her power is very likely that car accident 2 years ago. The other vehicle involved was a transport truck belonging to the Air Force, carrying chemicals from a military research institute of the Army. The person in charge was General Ross. Maria Hill replied. General Ross. Thaddeus Ross. Nick Fury was very surprised. That's right. In fact, we suspect that the so-called chemicals transported in that truck were actually the super soldier serum General Ross used on Bronski. Maria Hill nodded. Although Bronski's injection of the super soldier serum was a military secret, it was not a secret to S.H.I.E.L.D. After all, S.H.I.E.L.D. had also been following the Hulk's situation. That's surprising. It's my first time knowing that such a failed product could actually make someone fly. Does Bronski fly now too? Nick Fury was even more surprised. No, officer, in fact, according to our assessment, the abilities Jessica Jones has displayed completely overpower Bronski. So we suspect that Jessica Jones was also influenced by other factors during the process of being affected by the super soldier serum. Maria Hill explained. Then do you think our chances of recruiting Jessica Jones are high? Nick Fury brought the conversation back to the main point. Hello, Ms. Jessica Jones, I'm Agent Phil Coulson from the Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement and Logistics Division. Can we talk for a few minutes? Just after Christmas, Jessica's home welcomed a long-awaited guest for Rosen. The village chief of Marvel's beginner village, Phil Coulson. Oh, sorry, I've never heard of that department you're talking about. Jessica, who had actually been forewarned by Rosen, put on a confused expression. Of course, our department's situation is quite special. Perhaps I can introduce it to you in detail. Coulson said with a gentle smile. Come in. Jessica scrutinized him, nodded, and led him inside. Nice house, Ms. Jones, do you live alone? Following Jessica into the living room, Coulson, as an agent, instinctively observed the situation within the mansion before asking. Although Rosen actually lived there too, having anticipated this day, he had taken very strict security measures. So, unless one specifically entered Jessica's bedroom or the underground room vault, which were more private areas, there would be no trace of a second person living in the house. That's right. Would you like something to drink? Coffee. Jessica walked to the small bar in the living room, turned on the coffee machine, and asked Coulson. If possible, coffee, thank you. Coulson nodded. I don't think you're here to learn about my personal life, so tell me your purpose, agent. Jessica chuckled and asked as she handed the coffee to Coulson, whose gaze was wandering, still surveying the room to gather more information. Sorry, I'm just a little curious about the personal life of the famous Homelander. Coulson wasn't embarrassed by the remark. Instead, he gave a shy smile and directly revealed his intention. And then what? Jessica showed no surprise at the remark, nodding as she asked. It seems Ms. Jones isn't surprised that I know your identity. This time, it was Coulson who was somewhat surprised. Don't assume that just because my education is a bit lower and my grades are a bit worse, I'm completely ignorant of technological development. The little mask I usually wear only hides me from ordinary people. For national agencies like yours, it's meaningless. But I thought the first ones to come knocking would be departments like the FBI. Jessica said with a self-deprecating laugh. In fact, the FBI did want to speak with you to understand some things, but we stopped them. In certain special matters, my department has a higher level of authority, Coulson explained. I understand, you're like the ARGUS in DC. Jessica said, enlightened. So you're here to recruit me. The nature is somewhat similar, but please believe that our S.H.I.E.L.D. is not as overbearing and unreasonable as ARGUS. Coulson spoke favorably of his department, One could tell from Coulson's habit of collecting Captain America cards that he was actually a hidden otaku. He not only liked the real-world superhero Captain America but was also familiar with various superheroes from DC Comics. Of course, he would know about ARGUS. SHIELD, just like ARGUS, sounds much better than the full name, but whether you're reasonable or not isn't just talk. Jessica complimented SHIELD's abbreviation, then said. The abbreviation SHIELD was not, as many believe, coined after Pepper's complaint during the Iron Man incident. In fact, it had been in use since SHIELD was founded in the 1950s. However, SHIELD is not an open agency like the FBI. During the Iron Man incident, Coulson used the full name officially because it was his first contact with Tony Stark, and, of course, because of Tony Stark's special status, a slightly more detailed self-introduction was necessary. If it were like in Thor, when facing Jane Foster, who has a relatively ordinary background, no connections, and is British, Coulson would simply say, SHIELD, and move on. But Jessica, though her status can't compare to Tony Stark's, is a well-known Homelander throughout New York, so Coulson still needed to treat her with caution. Of course, Then I'll be direct. In fact, our SHIELD has always had a special project to recruit individuals with special abilities like yourself to deal with special incidents that could endanger world security, Phil Coulson explained. Of course, this is not mandatory, but if you agree, you can receive many special benefits. Like the Justice League. Jessica raised an eyebrow. You could understand it that way. But we don't have Superman, and we don't have Batman. Seeing Jessica's good attitude, Coulson spoke more freely and even made a small joke. But there can be Homelander. Jessica said with a smile. Of course. A real Homelander would definitely be more popular than Superman. Coulson's eyes lit up at the remark. Jessica's words clearly indicated her agreement to join SHIELD. Don't get too happy too soon. Although I agree to join the plan you mentioned, I also have conditions. Jessica waved her hand and said. You tell me, as long as our SHIELD's conditions allow. Coulson said, sitting up straight. It's actually very simple. Since you were able to find me, you must know about that car accident back then. I need the truth. Jessica said with a serious expression. Of course, I can promise you that right now. In fact, before coming, we had already uncovered the truth about that incident. The accident was not your father's responsibility, and a formal letter has already been sent to the relevant departments. You will get the results soon. Coulson was not at all surprised by Jessica's request. After all, when investigating Jessica's background, the details of that incident had already been thoroughly investigated. This was no issue for SHIELD at all. Of course, what SHIELD could uncover was only the superficial accident caused by the Air Force, as well as the internal corruption within the military, such as the Air Force, stealing the Army's research results for its own super soldier program. They did not uncover anything deeper behind the scenes, nor could they investigate further. After all, matters involving the military's internal affairs exceeded SHIELD's authority. However, for Jessica, this result was already sufficient. In addition, for operations I need to participate in, I require full disclosure. I don't want to be your tool, and I need sufficient freedom. When there are no operations, I also need to live my own life. Jessica nodded in satisfaction and then continued. That's natural. Unless absolutely necessary, we generally won't interfere with your private life. Besides that, do you have any other requests regarding your personal benefits? After more than an hour of discussion, the two finally finalized all the details of Jessica joining SHIELD. In early 2008, which followed shortly after, Jessica received her first mission, to investigate and apprehend Black Widow. Black Widow, of all people. Rosen was quite surprised when he learned the details of Jessica's first mission from SHIELD. After all, just a few months prior, he had witnessed Black Widow Natasha and Black Panther clash, and had even considered recruiting Black Widow. However, the rescue of Jessica had delayed those plans. By the time Rosen came to his senses, Black Widow had already left London, completely out of the surveillance range of his mechanical critters. So, recruiting Black Widow had to be put on hold for the time being. He never expected that Jessica's first mission after joining SHIELD would be to apprehend her. Wasn't this just falling right into Rosen's trap? You know her. Seeing Rosen's expression, Jessica was a little surprised. Of course I know her, and I know a lot more than S.H.I.E.L.D. does. Rosen said with a smile. After all, at this time, the person who knew Black Widow best, besides Dreykov, the master of the Red Room, and internal personnel like Natasha, was only Rosen, the transmigrator, well, not counting a certain someone at Kamar Taj who constantly peered into destiny. The mission brief S.H.I.E.L.D. gave Jessica only mentioned an entity codenamed Black Widow, who had caused multiple assassinations, coercions, intelligence trades, and a series of events threatening world security in Europe, requiring Jessica to cooperate with S.H.I.E.L.D. agents to apprehend or terminate her. But there was no mention of the Red Room behind Black Widow. However, it wasn't surprising. Although the Red Room was an intelligence agency that originated from the Great Mao in the Marvel Universe, during the Great Mao era, it was not an independent agency. Instead, it was a subordinate, unofficial affiliated organization specializing in training female spies, belonging to Leviathan, which was the counterpart to S.H.I.E.L.D. It was precisely because of this that Dreykov was able to hide this department when the Great Mao disintegrated, turning it into his private army. After all, Dreykov, who was only a major general at the time, didn't have the ability to quietly swallow an official organization. S.H.I.E.L.D. couldn't have known nothing about the Red Room, the status of the two sides was simply not equal. Leviathan, which had completely disintegrated along with the Great Mao, was the real opponent S.H.I.E.L.D. had to face back then. Oh. Tell me more. Rosen's words piqued Jessica's curiosity. Rosen didn't hide anything and immediately told Jessica about the Red Room. This Dreykov deserves to die, this Red Room shouldn't even exist. Jessica was indignant when she heard about Dreykov collecting little girls from all over the world and training them into killing machines. Originally, she wasn't too concerned about this mission, but after Rosen finished speaking, she became very invested. However, you're probably going to fail this mission. Just as Jessica was fuming, Rosen said with a smile. Huh. Why? Jessica was puzzled. To be precise, it's not a failure. I will secretly intervene to help you take down the Red Room and kill Dreykov, but the Black Widow agents of the Red Room cannot be handed over to S.H.I.E.L.D., Rosen explained. You wouldn't be interested in this Black Widow, would you? Jessica's expression became strange at his words. I am indeed interested, but not in the way you're thinking. Given the experiences of these Black Widow agents, even if the Red Room is destroyed, it will be very difficult for them to return to a normal life, and do you think S.H.I.E.L.D. would set them free? Rosen retorted. Of course, the first part of that answer was a bit false, but even if he was truly interested, he couldn't just say it directly to Jessica, could he? You have a point. Jessica wasn't some naive innocent, she immediately understood Rosen's meaning. She also understood that S.H.I.E.L.D., as an intelligence agency, couldn't truly be as benevolent as it appeared on the surface. They were polite to her because they were wary of her power, wary of Homelander's good reputation among the public, and because she was sufficiently cooperative. But what about these Black Widows, who originally belonged to a hostile force? Set them free after taking down the Red Room. What a joke. Whether out of their own duties or the demands of those in power. It would be impossible to allow such a group of unstable elements to escape their control. So, most likely, these Black Widow agents would all be assimilated by S.H.I.E.L.D. and continue to be used as tools. Wasn't Natasha in the original timeline like that? If she hadn't integrated well into the Avengers later, becoming an indispensable moderator among many superheroes, her fate would have been even worse. But your goal seems pretty similar, doesn't it? Jessica teased. She didn't believe that Rosen would set these Black Widow agents free. Am I that dark in your eyes? Rosen said with a helpless smile. HMPH, aren't you? Am I not, like these Black Widows, a tool in your hands now? Jessica scoffed. She was actually very intelligent. After spending so much time together, she clearly understood that Rosen was not some benevolent person. It was just that he had pulled her out when she was about to fall into the abyss, which was why she had succumbed to this man's embrace. After taking down Purple Man, Jessica had also investigated his past experiences. The content could only be described as shocking. Jessica couldn't imagine how tragic her fate would have been if she had truly fallen under his control. I never forced you, you did it willingly. Rosen said with a smile. It's the same for these Black Widow agents. If they are willing to work for me afterward, I would, of course, welcome them, but if they want to return to a normal life, I won't force them. Alright, I get it. So, how do you need me to cooperate with you on this? Jessica rolled her eyes and asked. You don't need to do anything special, you just need to carry this with you. Rosen handed a mechanical frog to Jessica. A week later, Jessica arrived in Budapest. Of course, she wasn't acting alone, a team of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents accompanied her. Among them was Hawkeye Barton, who, in the original plot, met Natasha, turned her, and almost took down Dreykov together. As the world's top intelligence agency, S.H.I.E.L.D.'s intelligence capabilities were formidable once it became serious. Within 2 days of arriving in Budapest, Jessica and her team had tracked Black Widow's whereabouts. And after some maneuvering, they successfully cornered Natasha, the strongest contemporary Black Widow, in a building. Natasha looked at Jessica, who was floating in the air completely unfazed by the bullets she had fired, with a look of despair. How unlucky was she? How long had it been since she was defeated by you-know-who, and now she encountered another freak. This time was even worse, the person could actually fly. Surrender, you are no match for me. Jessica looked down at Natasha, whose bullets were exhausted and whose mask had been torn off during the fight. Besides being a little shorter and having darker skin than me, she's better than me in every other way. No wonder Rosen took a liking to her. Jessica thought to herself, a hint of jealousy in her thoughts. She didn't believe Rosen's claim that he was only interested in her abilities. Who exactly are you people? Natasha asked, clearly unwilling to give up. Because S.H.I.E.L.D.'s operation against the Black Widow had not received permission from the Hungarian authorities, who were, in fact, completely unaware of it. So Jessica wasn't wearing her Homelander attire. Instead, she was wearing a SHIELD field uniform. Therefore, Natasha didn't recognize that the other party was the Homelander, who had recently risen to fame in the US. We are agents of SHIELD. If you surrender and tell us who you work for, we might consider letting you go. Hawkeye said to Natasha as he flanked her with his bow and arrow. Alright, I hope you keep your word. Knowing she had nowhere to run, Natasha reluctantly put down her weapons, preparing to surrender. But just then, a large swarm of bats flew from somewhere within the building, engulfing the area where the 3 people were. When the swarm of bats dispersed, only Jessica and Barton remained. Natasha had vanished without a trace. What was with those bats? Barton looked at the scattering bats, his expression full of surprise and uncertainty, then he couldn't help but gasp for air. At this moment, he was in quite a sorry state. His combat uniform was tattered, and his exposed skin was covered in bloodstains. Evidently, those bats earlier didn't just obstruct his vision, they also caused him significant injuries. The numerous small wounds on his body were all bite marks. In contrast, Jessica, standing nearby, was much better off, without a single injury. Barton, aside from a hint of envy, had no suspicion about this. After all, anyone in S.H.I.E.L.D. who knew anything about Jessica's intelligence knew she was invulnerable. Ordinary small-caliber weapons posed no threat to her, let alone mere bats. Of course, what Barton didn't realize was that the bats earlier had only obscured Jessica's vision, but hadn't attacked her at all. So the only one injured was Barton himself. These bats aren't natural, someone is controlling them. Jessica said with a grim expression. I just don't know if it's the person behind this Black Widow. She, of course, knew who was doing this, but she hadn't expected Rosen to be able to control bats. However, she was sure that Rosen had held back, otherwise, with his methods, Barton wouldn't have survived. Someone is controlling them. It seems the person behind this Black Widow is more complex than we anticipated. Hearing Jessica say that the bats were being controlled, Barton was surprised, and his face immediately became serious. We must report this immediately. Of course, but I think what you need most right now is to go to medical and get checked out, get some vaccinations or something. After all, as far as I know, bats carry a lot of viruses, especially carnivorous bats. I don't think those bats just now were vegetarians. Jessica said after examining Barton's injuries. And the Hungarian officials are probably arriving soon. Barton's expression immediately changed upon hearing this. He had been so preoccupied with the mission that he almost forgot about this point. You're right, thank you for the reminder. Let's head back immediately. As an elite agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. and a future member of the Avengers, Barton certainly wasn't afraid to die. But he absolutely wouldn't die from some unnecessary bacterial or viral infection. So he immediately left in a hurry. As the two withdrew and reported the mission status to S.H.I.E.L.D. Natasha, however, appeared in a seemingly abandoned apartment. In front of her, there was also a person wearing a mask, completely enveloped in a robe and armor. Just looking at the environment inside the apartment, Natasha couldn't help but twitch the corner of her mouth. Because she was too familiar with this place, it was originally one of her safe houses. Clearly, the person who saved her had probably been following her for more than just a day or two. Otherwise, it would have been impossible to know about this place. Who are you, and why did you save me? Natasha took a deep breath and asked the you-know-who who had saved her. Who I am isn't really important, what's important is that I can help you. Through a layer of armor, the other person's voice was somewhat distorted. But if Jessica were here, she would definitely be able to identify him. Undoubtedly, it was Rosen who had saved Natasha. Because Jessica always carried a small mechanical animal, Rosen was well aware of her and Barton's movements in Budapest. So as early as their first tracking of Natasha's whereabouts, Rosen had also started following Natasha. However, at that time, Rosen had not directly contacted Natasha. It wasn't until today, when Natasha was cornered and subdued by Jessica and Barton, that he intervened to rescue her. The bats that obscured Jessica and Barton's vision were merely a skill released by Rosen. The skill, Carrion Swarm, level 2 inches from the Dreadlord, an undead hero in Warcraft. In the game, its effect is to summon a large number of creatures and insects living in darkness to attack enemies, dealing fixed damage to enemies in a fan-shaped area. However, like many other skills, in the real world, the effect of Carrion Swarm also underwent some changes. Rosen could not only choose the type of dark creatures to summon but also control the degree of damage they inflicted on people. And compared to locusts, flies, and other insects and dark creatures, for ordinary people, bats were obviously more acceptable. Rosen, the spellcaster, was no exception. And just as Jessica thought, if Rosen wanted to, this one skill could have allowed those vampire bats to drain Barton's blood, rather than just leaving dozens of minor bloodstains on him. After all, Barton was just an ordinary person. Facing a few or a dozen bats might be fine, but when hundreds or thousands of bats suddenly appeared, no matter how many functions his arrows had, he wouldn't be able to react. Help me. Heh, you probably want to use me, right? Hearing Rosen's words, Natasha scoffed. Because of her upbringing, Natasha never believed in sudden kindness. However, she had just scoffed when she gasped. Although Jessica had held back during the fight to capture her alive. The power difference between the two was too great, and Natasha still suffered serious injuries. Black Widow agents are also human, they are just more tolerant than ordinary people, but when injured, they still feel pain. Drink this. Seeing her condition, Rosen wasn't stingy and offered a vial of glowing green potion. Looking at the potion Rosen handed over, Natasha didn't take it immediately, but fell into a brief hesitation. After all, no normal person would casually drink something handed to them by a stranger. Especially not a potion with such a strange color. However, her hesitation didn't last too long. She glanced at Rosen, who was shrouded in armor, steeled her heart, took the potion, pulled out the stopper, and drank it all in one gulp. The reason for this was that she knew she had no ability to resist the person in front of her. With Natasha's suspicious nature, how could she quietly cooperate and obediently be taken to this safe house by Rosen just because he saved her? The real reason was that on the way there, she had already tried various methods of resistance and escape. However, all of them were effortlessly blocked by Rosen. Especially his elusive abilities, Gale Step and Teleportation, made her completely unable to defend herself. The armor he wore was impervious to blades and bullets. This armor was not a product of the Marvel Universe, but like the staff of Antonidas, it was equipment refreshed in a special store. Blade armor, priced at 50 million. In the game, its effect was to increase the wearer's armor by 1 point and provide 7 points of armor value to surrounding allies, including the wearer. That is to say, it could provide up to 8 points of armor for the wearer. In terms of effect, it was similar to the Paladin's Devotion Aura in Human Heroes, but more powerful, as even a level 3 Devotion Aura only increased armor by 4.5 points. Of course, in the non-datafied real world, the concept of armor value certainly doesn't exist. So, armor value was replaced by a defensive level equivalent to 100 mm of homogeneous steel armor per point of armor. And 8 points of armor meant a defense of 800 mm of homogeneous steel armor, equivalent to, but not absolutely equal to, the comprehensive frontal armor defense level of most modern main battle tanks. In other words, wearing this armor was like wearing a main battle tank. Its comprehensive defense even surpassed that of a tank. After all, a tank only has this level of defense on its frontal armor, while this armor's defense is all-encompassing and perfect. What is perfect defense? It means it not only defends against frontal destructive power, but also neutralizes the impact force accompanying an attack. Although this level of defense is still far from vibranium equipment, it is already completely comparable to most Iron Man suits. Not to mention the light weapons Natasha used, even if hit directly by a cruise missile, Rosen would not be harmed in the slightest. Moreover, defense is not actually the most outstanding feature of blade armor. In the system's special store, this armor was also endowed with two characteristics. One is that the appearance can be customized, only once. Second is, self-recovery. There's nothing to say about the first characteristic, it merely satisfies aesthetic needs, and its practical effect is not significant. Under Rosen's definition, the appearance of this armor was set to the male version of the Watcher's full-body armor. To complement this armor, Rosen also put on a fire cloak and took up the Watcher's exclusive weapon, the Moonglaive, given by the system. Aside from differences in gender and race, he was completely the Watcher. But the second characteristic is different. Although the equipment sold by the system is very powerful, it is not like in games where it won't be damaged even if placed in the equipment slot. Instead, like the equipment Rosen gave Jessica, it only works when worn. This real-world change has the advantage of no longer being limited by the number of equipment slots in the game. As long as it can be worn in the corresponding position on the body, it can be worn, same effect in the same position does not stack. The drawback is that these pieces of equipment will be damaged when subjected to attacks that exceed their load. Once damaged, their original effects will also disappear directly. Since Rosen has not mastered the ability to repair magic equipment, if these pieces of equipment break, he can only buy new ones. High-value equipment like the Staff of Antonidas, once damaged, would be enough to make Rosen's heart ache. As for common equipment like rune bracers, losing a few is fine, but if too many break, it's equally painful. In this situation, this self-recovery characteristic becomes particularly precious. After all, blade armor has the defensive power of 800 mm of homogeneous steel armor, but that doesn't mean it won't be damaged under attacks of that level. Just like a tank's frontal armor, one or two high-intensity artillery shell attacks won't penetrate it, but what about dozens or hundreds of rounds? It was precisely under Rosen's all-encompassing defensive and ability suppression that Natasha, already severely wounded, gave up all resistance and allowed Rosen to take her back to this safe house. If she couldn't resist, she might as well accept it gracefully. And Natasha quickly felt the benefits of lying down. As soon as she finished the potion, the pain from her injuries in various parts of her body quickly subsided. Her wounds also healed rapidly at a visible speed, leaving no scars. She even wondered if it was her imagination, but Natasha felt her skin quality had improved significantly. What is this? It's simply miraculous. Natasha couldn't help but exclaim. A life potion. It can quickly heal injuries and common illnesses, and can also delay other major diseases. Rosen explained, however, the production cost is not low. Thank you very much. So, what do you want me to do? Don't tell me you can help me or anything like that again. I won't believe that such a mysterious guy would help someone who is of no use to him, Natasha said. She could actually pretty much guess Rosen's purpose. And she wasn't resistant to it. After all, she was still just a member of the Red Room at this time, not yet recruited by S.H.I.E.L.D., nor did she possess a righteous heart like she would after becoming a superhero. All she wanted now was freedom and a more stable life than her current one. Regarding freedom, she didn't hold much hope, otherwise, she wouldn't have joined S.H.I.E.L.D., with her experience and intelligence, how could she not know that joining an organization like SHIELD would never grant freedom? However, compared to the dark and torment-filled Red Room, at least SHIELD could allow her to live a more stable life, without having to hide like a mouse. But now, she had met Rosen earlier, and the situation was different. Not to mention the miraculous abilities Rosen displayed, just this one vial of potion was enough to lower her resistance to Rosen's recruitment. Having lived a life of constant peril, she understood the significance of such a potion. Among other things, with a few more of these potions, facing the strange armored man, Black Panther, and the flying woman, Jessica, she had encountered before, she wouldn't be as helpless as she had been. That's right, I am indeed using you, but I'm also helping you escape the Red Room, escape Drakov. Hearing Natasha's blunt words, Rosen didn't shy away at all, stating directly. Then what's the price? Natasha asked. It's simple. From now on, work for me. Don't worry, I'm not a pervert like Drakov who enjoys torturing people and has a strong desire for control. Besides, when you're on missions, you can live the life you want, not a reclusive life in hiding, but truly live under the sun with your own identity. Rosen said with a smile, giving his promise. Live under the sun. How can I trust you? I don't think those guys at SHIELD would give up pursuing me. If this promise came from SHIELD, Natasha wouldn't doubt it, but this you-know-who in front of her, she still had some reservations. Rosen wasn't surprised by Natasha's skepticism. In fact, before this week, he really couldn't make such a promise. After all, organizations like SHIELD were indeed too powerful. With Rosen's abilities, it wasn't difficult to help Natasha hide. But to live openly with her own identity was indeed impossible. However, with the refresh of the special mall this week, the situation completely changed. Because this week's refresh brought out two things completely beyond Rosen's expectations. Small dark portal, single universe version, through magic positioning, a portal can be opened connecting to any location within the universe, and the coordinates are bound after opening. To open new coordinates, it needs to be purchased again. Mana consumption, 100. Portal duration, can be maintained long-term with mana input. Note: the portal can be attacked, please open it in a safe state. Quantity: 1. Price: 10 million. Small dark portal, multiverse version, a small portal can be opened leading to a random parallel universe. After use, it will be permanently bound to that parallel universe. To open a new parallel universe, it needs to be purchased again, a bound parallel universe will not be targeted a second time. Mana consumption, 1000. Portal duration, 30 seconds. Note: the portal can be attacked, please open it in a safe state, to protect the host's safety. The first opening will be positioned in an absolutely safe area, subsequent openings will be positioned at the host's last location upon leaving. The time flow rate between the parallel universe and the main universe is 1. Price: 100 million. Quantity: 1. It can be said that when Rosen saw these two small dark portals appear at that time, his heart was incredibly shocked. Especially the multiverse version of the small dark portal, which would represent that his future development would not be limited to the current universe. The vast multiverse gate would be completely open to Rosen. The single universe version of the small dark portal was also equally good. Traveling between universes would become more convenient, although he would inevitably draw the Archmage's mass teleportation skill in the future. It's hard to say if mass teleportation skills could perform interstellar level teleportation. At the same time, Rosen was also very fortunate that in the past few months, the money accumulated during Jessica's time as a superhero, eradicating gangs, had not been hastily used to draw skills. Besides the blade armor, the special mall hadn't refreshed any other high-priced equipment or treasures. Otherwise, Rosen really wouldn't have been able to afford these two portals. Especially recently, with the prior existence of the you-know-who, Rosen, and then Jessica, the Homelander. The gangs in New York had become smarter. The amount of cash kept in strongholds and carried during transactions was getting less and less. Even giants like Kingpin had started to store less cash. As a result, Rosen's black-on-black income also greatly decreased. Dismantling a gang stronghold might only yield tens of thousands. This forced him and Jessica to start expanding their operations to neighboring states and cities. Without much hesitation, Rosen directly bought both portals. And opened the multiverse version of the Dark Portal. So now, Rosen's promise to let Natasha live, under the sun, was not boasting, but something he could truly achieve, just not in this world. Especially since that world didn't have powerful and chaotic organizations like S.H.I.E.L.D., Hydra, or the Red Room, nor crises like Ultron or Thanos. There were only a very small number of power users who posed virtually no threat to Natasha. With her abilities, she could easily obtain a new identity in that world and live far better than in this world. Don't worry, since I dare to say it, I can definitely do it, and I can even prove it right now. Rosen said with a smile. How will you prove it? Rosen's words piqued Natasha's interest. Rosen didn't speak, but his equipment began to change. The full body armor disappeared, transforming into a red archmage's robe, revealing his slightly youthful, handsome face. The moonblade in his hand became the glowing staff of Antonidas. On his head, he wore a king's crown, identical to Jessica's. At the same time, two exquisite pendants hung from his robe, small magic pendants, small blue cards. The reason for the change of attire was, firstly, because only Natasha was here, so concealing his identity was not very meaningful. Secondly, it was because he needed to gather enough mana to open the dark portal. After all, opening the small dark portal multiverse version required a full 1000 mana. And his base mana was only 225, plus the 30 intelligence bonus from the staff of Antonidas, it was only 675. 1 intelligence equals 15 mana capacity. For this, he had to equip some other intelligence gear. The king's crown added +5 to all attributes, increasing mana capacity by 75. The robe he wore, named Archmage's robe, increased intelligence by 6 points, adding 90 mana capacity. And the effect of the magic pendants was to increase mana capacity by 150 points each. With the enhancement of these equipments, Rosen's mana capacity reached 1140 points. This met the requirement for opening the dark portal while also leaving some leeway in case of emergencies. However, at this moment, Natasha's attention was not focused on the sudden change in Rosen's equipment. Instead, she was captivated by Rosen's face. Wow, I really didn't expect that the one wanting to recruit me would be such a young and handsome guy. By the way, are you even an adult? Natasha said, surprised. During their previous conversation, through the distorted voice under the armor, she had judged that Rosen's age wouldn't be very old. But she truly hadn't expected Rosen to be so young. Rosen slightly twitched the corner of his mouth at this, not answering, but instead waving his staff. Immediately, a dark portal, about the size of a regular door, slowly rose from the floor of the room. Although its appearance was identical to the dark portal in games, it was actually a pure energy construct. Therefore, it would not cause any damage to the surrounding environment. The portal can only last for 30 seconds, hurry up. Rosen urged. Seeing that Rosen didn't want to answer, Natasha didn't dwell on it. Although she was greatly surprised by the sudden appearance of the dark portal, she remained outwardly calm. At Rosen's urging, she walked in very decisively. After a moment of disorientation, Natasha came to her senses and found herself in a luxurious room. Where is this place? Natasha asked subconsciously as she looked at the scenery outside the window after Rosen walked out of the teleportation gate. This is Long Island, New York. Rosen replied, and as he spoke, he didn't forget to change his clothes into a casual outfit. It was just like when he instantly switched from armor to a mage's robe before. These were all new uses of the system space he had recently discovered, directly switching clothes and equipment in the system space with what he was wearing. It was like a quick change of outfit, very convenient. What? In such a short time, we've gone from Budapest to New York, 7,000 kilometers away. Natasha's eyes widened again. Hee, it's New York all right, but it's not the New York 7,000 kilometers away, nor is it the New York you're familiar with, Rosen said with a mysterious smile. I hope you can handle the truth. What do you mean? Natasha was confused. At this time, she hadn't yet received the concept of parallel or multi-universe, so she hadn't thought in that direction at all. Rosen didn't speak, he just looked at a wall calendar. Why is it May? Wait, 2002. You're not going to tell me we're in 2002, are you? Natasha noticed something was wrong at first glance because, in her original world, it was January. The second glance was even more off, 2002. With a calendar for each year, if the month was wrong, she could tell herself she had turned to the wrong month. But the year was wrong. This didn't look like a place that hadn't been maintained for years. But if her memory served her right, it was clearly 2008 this year. You brought me through time? Natasha asked, her face filled with surprise and uncertainty. Hee, just saying it might not be very convincing, let's go out for a walk. Rosen said, walking out. I suddenly wish I was dreaming. Natasha muttered, following him. Following Rosen into a luxury car, the two traveled from Long Island all the way to Manhattan. After changing into a high-end outfit in a clothing store, Natasha, with a serious expression, followed Rosen to a tall building. Much of the information she saw along the way indicated that they were indeed in 2002, not 2008. But the most shocking thing wasn't that. It was the building across from their current location. OS Corp. Osborne Group. More precisely, Osborne Group. But the problem was that as a Black Widow agent, Natasha had also been to New York and was very familiar with some of New York's landmark buildings. She knew that New York's most luxurious office building was the Stark Industries Tower. But what was this Osborne Group doing in the location of the Stark Industries Tower? That's right, the first parallel universe Rosen opened was not, as he had originally expected, some strange universe similar to the What If series, where various plotlines diverged from the main universe. Instead, it was the Spider-Man universe from the Tobey Maguire version, at the beginning of its storyline. The small dark portal also displayed the world's number 96,283. Rosen was surprised but also delighted by this. As compared to a universe with Avengers and other superheroes, this simple Spider-Man universe was much safer and very suitable to be his future logistical base. The only thing Rosen regretted was that the dollars from this universe and other parallel universes could not be used for system top-ups. The system only recognized the official circulating dollars of the main universe, and he didn't know why. Don't tell me Stark Industries went bankrupt. Natasha said expressionlessly, looking at the Osborne Group building. In fact, she had already guessed a possibility because, along the way, she hadn't seen a single poster of a certain flamboyant world's richest man. This was almost impossible in New York. It was just that she was somewhat unwilling to accept this fact for a moment. Accept the fact, this is not the world you originally knew, but a parallel universe, and it's where I've prepared for you to live openly in the future. Rosen mercilessly shattered Natasha's fantasy and stated the facts. This is actually a good thing for you, isn't it? After breaking free from the Red Room and breaking free from the past, how much in your original world is truly worth cherishing? It can't be that fictional family, can it? Believe me, you wouldn't want to see what Alexei looks like now. The fictional family Rosen spoke of was, of course, the fake family, formed by the Red Guardian Alexei, the Red Room instructor, the previous generation Black Widow Melina, and little Yelena, who had been undercover in the United States for over a decade during Natasha's childhood. You're right, but if I'm not mistaken, my future missions won't be limited to a single universe, will they? You, who can connect parallel universes, don't tell me you can only open this one universe. Compared to coming to another universe, the fact that Rosen knew about Alexei and them no longer stirred Natasha's emotions at all. Instead, she shifted the topic to something else. That's right, although for now there's only this one universe, in the future there will undoubtedly be a large number of parallel universes waiting for us to explore. How about it? Are you willing? Rosen nodded slightly, agreeing with Natasha's statement. One could only say she was indeed the most excellent Black Widow agent in history. With Rosen's complete disclosure, she not only quickly accepted reality but also analyzed other information. Of course, the multi-universe and all that sounds much more interesting than those Red Room missions, but this means increased work risk, so a low salary won't do. Natasha said jokingly. Then you're going to be disappointed. I'm very good at exploiting employees, but you can consider finding an extra job in this world in your spare time, and then pay to work for me. Rosen also joked. Capitalists like you really should be hung from lampposts. Natasha rolled her eyes and then teased in Russian. What does that mean? Rosen asked. Nothing, just praising your shrewdness. Natasha said with a smile. Well, thank you for the compliment. Rosen raised an eyebrow. Let's not talk about that anymore, the terms are settled. When are we going to deal with Drakov? Natasha asked, her expression serious. No rush, don't you want to explore this world a bit more? Shall I take you to see the protagonist of this world? Rosen asked. Protagonist. Natasha was puzzled. That's right, every universe, in a sense, has its own protagonist. In our universe, you are also one of the protagonists, Rosen nodded. Sounds cool. I'm suddenly a little eager to see what kind of person this protagonist you speak of is. Natasha suddenly became interested in Rosen's protagonist. Let's go. Oh, I forgot to tell you something. I'm not a capitalist, but a feudal noble lord. Not only will I exploit employees, but I'll also restore the right of first night. Rosen said with a smile. You speak Russian. Is this the protagonist you were talking about? In the corner of the rooftop, Natasha couldn't help but twitch her lips as she watched Peter Parker, who was using his spider silk ability for the first time and ended up crashing into a GG brand sign in the distance. That's right, he's a pretty interesting kid, isn't he? Rosen said with a slight smile. Seeing the young Toby little spider made him feel like he was reliving his childhood. In the world before Rosen's transmigration, Spider-Man was released when he was just an elementary school student. So, the other party was a genuine childhood memory of his. Unfortunately, he missed the plot where the other party was bitten by a spider because he couldn't confirm the time of the spider bite and had things to do in the main universe. He's a bit naive, but what's that ability to shoot webs from his hands? Natasha was noncommittal. Compared to the immature Peter himself, she was more interested in his ability to climb walls barehanded and shoot webs. He gained that ability through genetic mutation after being bitten by a super spider, and because of this, he became the only superhero in this world, Spider-Man. Rosen explained. This was also the most tragic aspect of Toby Little Spider. Various empowered villains emerged endlessly, but he was the only superhero. Abilities like a spider, interesting. Do you know where these super spiders came from? Hearing Rosen's explanation, Natasha said thoughtfully. Although the Peter Parker in front of her was very immature and his ability usage was still a mess, Natasha, with her eyes of a super agent, could easily see his potential. Moreover, it must be said, this ability was very compatible with her. After all, a Black Widow is also a type of spider, isn't she? Tisk, you're already eyeing his abilities. In fact, I do know where those super spiders are, but I must warn you, genetic mutation is highly unpredictable. He was bitten and became Spider-Man. You might be bitten and just die. Rosen reminded Natasha. Haha, I don't believe you haven't thought about those super spiders. Natasha glanced at Rosen. I have thought about it, but after careful consideration, I deemed it unnecessary, and so should you. I can provide you with some magic equipment later, which can also give you superhuman combat power. There's no need to take this risk. Rosen replied, especially since we are not experts in biology and cannot be sure if this genetic mutation will worsen over time. Rosen's words were not unfounded worries. After all, in the comics, Spider-Man has been known to turn into a spider demon. Although from the appearance of 3 generations of Spider-Men in No Way Home, it can be inferred that the probability of Toby's Spider-Man experiencing such a situation is very low. But that was just an isolated case. It cannot be used as a reference. It's important to know that in the plot, the source of the super spiders, Columbia University's School of Science, had cultivated a total of 15 super spiders, and the one that bit Peter was just one of them. Although the people in this spider project team didn't know that Spider-Man became Spider-Man because he was bitten by their spider. But to say that they hadn't conducted biological experiments with these super spiders, Rosen would not believe it for a million reasons. And the fact is, there was only one Spider-Man. Your concerns are valid, but equipment, after all, is just external force. Only by becoming strong yourself is true strength. I think these super spiders have great potential to be explored. Don't worry, I'm not someone who doesn't know the gravity of things. I think we can conduct a certain degree of research on them before considering whether to use them on humans. Natasha, however, did not want to give up. It's unclear if it was due to her experiences of being successively crushed by Black Panther, Jessica, and Rosen. Natasha's desire for power now seemed somewhat intense. As for biological experts, I happen to have one I'm very familiar with. Are you talking about your adoptive mother and instructor, Melina? Hearing Natasha's words, Rosen immediately thought of her. Having watched the movie, she naturally knew the potential of this former Black Widow in scientific research. The gene serum similar to Purple Man's mind control ability and the massive floating city in the movie Black Widow were both her masterpieces. And in fact, she was already part of Rosen's recruitment plan. Exactly. Although I don't want to admit it, her value is actually far greater than mine. If you want to take control of the Red Room, she is definitely a key point you cannot abandon. Natasha nodded. I never said I wanted to take control of the Red Room. Rosen twitched his lips. Heh, do you think I believe that? Natasha chuckled lightly. Alright, I admit you're right. Super spiders indeed have great potential to be explored. I will follow up on this matter. Rosen decisively changed the topic. Need help? Natasha raised an eyebrow and asked. No need. It's just a few spiders, and I think compared to those super spiders whose results are unknown, the one in front of us is what we need to focus on, Rosen said. You mean, recruit this kid? Natasha suddenly understood. She knew Rosen wouldn't bring her to see this kid for no reason. It's too early to talk about recruitment. He's still too immature. What he needs now is guidance and some help with his life, Rosen said, just as he had told the elderly Captain America when they met earlier. Since he had come to this world, he had to do something. Compared to the mischievous kid in the main universe who always meant well but caused trouble, the little spider's life in this world was somewhat too heavy. Wow, I understand what you mean, but letting me, a Black Widow, guide him, aren't you afraid I'll lead him astray? The astute Natasha immediately understood Rosen's intention. And honestly, with this kid's potential, I probably won't be able to teach him for too long. Heh, if you can lead him astray, that's your skill. I just hope his life can be a little smoother. The same goes for you. Take advantage of this time to sort out your identity in this world. I imagine that shouldn't be a big problem for you, Rosen said with a slight smile. It's not an easy task to lead this little spider astray. Of course, but I'll need some funding. Natasha didn't refuse. And what about the Red Room? No rush with the Red Room. I'll make arrangements. It won't be long before SHIELD's attention is drawn elsewhere, and then we can make our move. Rosen said. By his calculations, Tony Stark was about to be kidnapped. As for the funds, do you think these are enough? Rosen placed a box in front of Natasha and opened it. Inside were stacks of gold bars. Oh, I misspoke earlier. You're a generous boss. Natasha's eyes gleamed. All this money is yours. Spend it however you want. Rosen said very generously. He lacked money, but at the same time, he didn't lack money. It's quite a paradox. After leaving Natasha with enough funds, and equipment and some potions similar to Jessica's, the two temporarily parted ways. However, after parting ways, Rosen was not in a hurry to collect Super Spider or return to the main universe. Instead, he turned and went to a mansion in Manhattan. Mr. Rosen, you're finally here. Not long after entering the living room under the guidance of a servant, a calm middle-aged man walked out quickly. The person who came was Norman Osborn, the first opponent Little Spider would face in the future, and also the richest man in this world. It's been a while. Mr. Osborn still looks so robust. You haven't used a human enhancement serum, have you? Rosen said with a slight smile. Sir, you're joking. Since we have General SOCOM's support, the research process for the human enhancement serum can proceed steadily, so I naturally don't need to take that risk again. Norman said with an awkward smile. From their conversation, it was not difficult to see that the two had already been in contact more than once. In fact, after first opening the dark door and coming to this universe, and confirming that this was Toby Spider-Man's universe. The first person Rosen looked for was not Toby Little Spider, but Norman Osborn. Without having injected the imperfect human enhancement serum and thus splitting into the Green Goblin personality, Norman Osborn was a shrewd and capable businessman. Of course, his scientific research capabilities were another matter. Although Norman Osborn also had some scientific research capabilities, whether it was the human enhancement serum or the Green Goblin suit, the real main researcher was Dr. Strom, his subordinate. But overall, the other party was still a very good collaborator. So after some friendly negotiation, not really, this businessman, who became the Green Goblin in the original plot, decisively accepted Rosen's cooperation invitation. The Longsword mansion where Rosen and Natasha appeared in this world was provided by this generous rich man. Of course, Norman Osborn would not suffer a loss. To be precise, as of now, he had gained far more than Rosen. Because before Rosen appeared, Norman was worried that General Socom, the newly appointed head of military research projects, wanted to cancel the cooperation with Osborn Group. And Rosen only took one day to deal with the troublesome General Socom. This allowed the cooperation project between Osborn Group and the military to continue, and they also received many new orders. This also caused Osborn Group's stock to soar, and its development momentum instantly suppressed its old rival, Exploration Aerospace. In view of all this, and the magical abilities Rosen displayed during their first meeting, Norman Osborn had to treat this collaborator with caution. However, it was also because Rosen intervened and controlled General Socom that Norman in this timeline did not risk using the human enhancement serum as he did in the original plot, and naturally did not turn into the Green Goblin. This avoided more than one tragedy for both the Osborn family and Toby Little Spider. After all, in the original plot, Norman, when not corrupted, indeed took great care of Toby Little Spider. Even when he was corrupted, he still prioritized recruiting Little Spider. As for how Rosen controlled General Socom, it was actually very simple. Because in a certain week before, the system store had a one-time item, the Scepter of Domination. In the game, this item could control one non-heroic unit of level 5 or below, and could be used 3 times. But obviously, in reality, there is no distinction between levels and heroic or non-heroic units. So the usage restriction of this item became a more metaphysical setting, and it could only be used once, but fortunately, the price was not expensive, only 1 million. Scepter of Domination can completely control a non-key destiny character. One-time item disappears after use. Non-key destiny character. Rosen had a slight guess about this. It was very likely those passerby characters in various Marvel universes. But this judgment was still too vague and difficult to define. However, fortunately, this scepter had a self-identification function. In other words, Rosen only needed to think of a target, and the scepter could automatically determine whether it could be used. At first, Rosen wanted to use it on Norman Osborn, the number 1 villain who controlled a large amount of wealth, but the scepter prompted that it could not be used. As for Toby Little Spider, Rosen would be crazy to try. And Rosen's second option, the U.S. president, also failed. Obviously, the leader of a world-class powerful nation is too important. Even if he didn't appear in the original plot, he still played an extremely important key role. After some attempts, Rosen finally set his target on General Socom, a powerful and influential figure who, however, died early in the original plot. As for why he didn't use it in the main universe, of course, it was because the overall power level of that world was too high. In Toby Little Spider's world, Rosen dared to say that he was invincible on Earth. But in the main universe, even though it wasn't yet the period of concentrated superhero outbreaks, Rosen didn't have that confidence in the short term. So it was better to first grasp this world in his hands. It's good that it wasn't used. With sufficient funds, stability should be the priority, Rosen said. How is the stock repurchase going? Unlike the main universe, where the Stark family always held absolute control of the group, Osborn Group, although founded by Norman Osborn, had absorbed a large amount of external capital during its entrepreneurial process. Although he was still the chairman, he had long lost control. As a result, in the original plot, he was overthrown by the board of directors, who wanted to sell the entire company to Exploration Aerospace. And this was one of the reasons for Norman Osborn's complete corruption. So after solving the military's investment and order problems, Rosen's first task for Norman was to gradually repurchase shares and transfer them to Rosen's name. At the same time, Rosen's identity in this world was also resolved by Norman. As for why Natasha's identity was left for her to resolve herself, and why Natasha and Norman Osborn were not introduced, it was naturally to keep a hand, hoping that the two would form a certain check and balance in this universe later, to avoid a situation where one dominates. With General Socom's help, most of the shares have been repurchased, but there are still 3 shareholders who insist on not giving up their shares. According to my investigation, They have the shadow of exploration aerospace behind them, Norman Osborn replied. Heh, aren't you just trying to use this opportunity to get rid of dissenters? Rosen looked at Norman Osborn with a half-smile when he heard him speak. Even though they are both military-industrial complexes, Stark Industries in the main Marvel universe can largely ignore official forces like the military and Congress, acting as it pleases. But one thing to understand is that Stark Industries in the Marvel universe has been extremely special since its inception. The reason lies with Howard Stark, a scientist who was almost a prodigy. The technological level and quality of the various technologies and military weapons he developed were overwhelmingly superior to other arms manufacturers. This remained true even after Tony Stark took over. Therefore, from World War II to the 21st century, the importance of Stark Industries has been irreplaceable. Other arms manufacturers could only pick up the scraps from Stark Industries before Tony Stark closed the weapon manufacturing division. However, in Toby Little Spider's universe, the situation is reversed. There are many arms manufacturers like the Osborn Group and Quest Aerospace, each with their own advantages, making it impossible to achieve the unparalleled dominance of Stark Industries. Moreover, the military-industrial complex in this world has not developed to the point of a single dominant entity like Lockheed Martin before Rosen's transmigration. Quest Aerospace could only barely suppress the Osborn Group by relying on its greater capital and through means such as bribing influential officials like SOCOM. In terms of technical strength, it was not even as good as the Osborn Group. So, while Quest Aerospace's strength at this time was decent, it was far from developed enough to directly confront influential military representatives like General SOCOM. However, if Quest Aerospace were allowed to continue its normal development, it would have the potential to become the Lockheed Martin of this world. But there are no ifs in this world. Rosen has arrived, and this position will undoubtedly belong to the Osborn Group. Even if Rosen hadn't come, Quest Aerospace wouldn't get this position, because Norman Osborn would transform into the Green Goblin, directly overturning the table, sending himself and Quest Aerospace's shareholders to the sky with a pumpkin bomb. And now, just as SOCOM could easily cancel the Osborn Group's military investments and orders in the plot, he could also easily cancel Quest Aerospace's projects. With his suppression, or at least during General SOCOM's tenure, Quest Aerospace would not be able to directly resist. Under these circumstances, with Norman Osborn's capabilities, plus the help of SOCOM, a high-ranking military general, how could they not deal with a few shareholders through collusion between officials and businessmen? Rosen believed his nonsense. It's more likely that he had some old grudge with the other party and wanted to use Rosen's hand to get rid of them. Sir, you misunderstand. I can, of course, force them to give up their shares, but in doing so, news of internal struggles within the group's senior management might leak out, affecting the group's stock price. Wouldn't that also be a loss for you? Norman Osborn was indeed a shrewd businessman. Even when Rosen directly exposed his thoughts, he calmly offered an excuse without batting an eye. Heh, a good reason, let's just say it is. But I hope this is the only time. Rosen chuckled lightly, issued a warning, and then let the matter drop. After all, the Osborn Group still relied on this old man to manage it. And the other party would only play such small tricks. As long as his son, Harry Osborn, was around, he wouldn't lose his mind and fall out with Rosen. Of course, sir, I will never make the same mistake again. Norman Osborn thought of the once arrogant SOCOM, who, under his witness, was turned into a loyal dog by a wave of Rosen's hand, and a sense of powerlessness welled up in his heart. After all, the scepter could only be used once, and the fact that it couldn't control him, the main villain in the original plot, was something only Rosen knew. Norman Osborn didn't know that. So, in Norman's eyes, Rosen was synonymous with power and mystery. He didn't want himself and his son to end up like SOCOM. Moreover, Rosen's threat was not entirely baseless. Once he accumulated all the Dark Ranger skills and activated the ultimate skill, Talisman, although like the scepter, it most likely couldn't control main plot characters like the Osborn father and son. But what about everyone else in the Osborn Group? I will resolve this matter within a day. Also, just to inform you, after some time, I will arrange for a representative to be permanently stationed at the Osborn Group to assist you with your work. Is that all right? Rosen continued. The person he was going to arrange, of course, would not be Natasha, but someone from the main Marvel universe, just like Natasha. It's just that Rosen hasn't contacted this person yet, but it will be soon. Of course, I will cooperate fully. Norman quickly agreed. Cooperate with my work. Monitoring me is more like it. But did Norman dare to refuse? Moreover, as the chairman of the Osborne Group, he was already accustomed to such things. After all, the former board members were similar in nature. It's just that now a group of people has been replaced by one person. Don't worry, work hard for me, and I'm not a stingy person. I will help you make the Osborne Group the #1 group in the world. Also, these are your rewards. Rosen waved his hand, and two appeared before Norman. They were healing potions. After hitting with a stick, you always have to offer a carrot. These are. Norman Osborn asked, somewhat puzzled. Rosen did not answer, but instead waved to a bodyguard standing not far away, signaling him to come over. Although the bodyguard was puzzled, he still walked over at Norman's signal. Take off your shirt. Rosen commanded. Upon hearing Rosen's command, the bodyguard's pupils constricted. Big brother, I sell my life, not my body. And even if I did sell my body, it wouldn't be here, right? There are other people here. It's a good thing Rosen couldn't read minds, otherwise, a flame storm would have surely followed. Finally, under the suppression of his boss, Norman, the bodyguard still took off his shirt, revealing his muscular upper body. But in the next second, a moon blade appeared in Rosen's hand and lightly slashed. The bodyguard hadn't even reacted before he was cut with a huge wound, dozens of centimeters long, running diagonally across his entire body, almost exposing his ribs. Blood immediately gushed out. However, before the other party could even scream, a water elemental had already appeared beside him, shoving an opened vial into his mouth. Then, under Norman Osborn's shocked gaze, that terrifying wound healed rapidly at a visible speed in just over 10 seconds. And the bodyguard also felt the pain in his body disappear, curiously touching the location of the original wound. But besides the residual blood proving what had just happened, not even a nail-sized wound could be found. Sir, this is. Norman Osborn immediately became excited. If this potion could be mass-produced. Heh, don't even think about it. This is not a technological creation, but a magic product. It can heal all injuries except limb severance. It's for you and your son to save your lives. Of course, if you think you can reproduce it, you can take it to analyze its components, but I won't replenish it for you. Although Rosen couldn't read minds, Norman's reaction was too obvious, so he immediately reminded him. However, having said that, if Norman could really replicate the healing potion, Rosen wouldn't object. After all, cash in the main Marvel universe was getting harder and harder to collect. So, when he returned to the main Marvel universe, he planned to visit the US-Mexico border. Otherwise, if the special mall refreshed with something good again, he would really have to rob the Federal Reserve. Thank you for your generosity, sir. Hearing Rosen's reminder, Norman Osborn was disappointed but also extremely surprised. Although the Osborn family in this universe did not have the hereditary illness like in the Amazing Spider-Man universe, who could refuse something as clearly life-saving as a healing potion. The next day, news broke about the deaths of 3 former shareholders of the Osborn Group. All of them died of heart failure. Undoubtedly, Rosen was behind it. Norman Osborn saw the news without the slightest surprise. However, at this moment, he felt no joy from having someone else do his dirty work. Instead, his fear of Rosen grew even deeper. Because through other channels, Norman received much more detailed information than what was reported by the media. The cause of death for those 3 shareholders was not simple heart failure, nor was it due to drugs or other physical harm. They were scared to death. What kind of terror could make 3 seasoned capitalists, who had weathered many storms, be scared to death? Norman Osborn couldn't imagine it. But he could foresee that if he betrayed Rosen, the same fate would likely befall him. Perhaps even worse. Rosen was unaware of Norman Osborn's feelings. Even if he knew, he wouldn't care. Just getting rid of a few old geezers, no need to even lift a finger. Yes, literally, he didn't lay a hand on them. He merely cast one spell. This spell was, Fear, Level 1, from the neutral hero Pit Lord in Warcraft 3. In the game, this skill reduces the attack power of enemies within a 500 radius by 30%-50% for 15 seconds. However, in the real world, the effect of this skill is no longer to reduce enemy attack power, but rather similar to the Warlock's Fear skill, commonly known as Fear, in the online game World of Warcraft, which was developed based on Warcraft lore. Within the range, it creates terrifying illusions, causing hostile targets to become trapped and unable to attack, with the specific effect depending on the hostile target's personal will. But as a skill from the Pit Lord, a high-ranking officer race from the Burning Legion, Rosen's fear effect is far superior to the Warlock's half-baked fear in the game. In the game, the Warlock's fear can only affect a maximum of 5 people at a time, and its range is only a 10-yard radius. A yard is an imperial unit, with 1 yard being only 0.9144 meters. However, Rosen's fear has the same range as the Pit Lord, with a radius of up to 500 meters, allowing him to select affected targets without any upper limit. The duration is also not limited to just 15 seconds, but like the effect, it depends on the personal will of the target being cast upon. If Rosen wished, he could even keep those with weak wills immersed in terrifying illusions indefinitely. As for the specific power and the level of willpower required to resist it, Rosen couldn't judge for now. Because so far, among the people Rosen has encountered, no one has been able to resist this skill, not even Jessica Jones, whom he personally shaped into Homelander. And those 3 Osborne Group shareholders were already in their 70s and 80s, with very fragile hearts. One fear cast, and there's no need to talk about how long it lasted. In just a few seconds, their already extremely fragile hearts completely stopped functioning. After Rosen returned to the main universe, the first thing he did was check Jessica's location. Through the view of the mechanical animal on her, he saw that she was currently on a military transport plane. With her were Hawkeye Barton, Phil Coulson, and several other agents clearly from S.H.I.E.L.D. Had they already left Budapest? Did S.H.I.E.L.D. give up on pursuing Natasha, the Black Widow? That wouldn't fit Nick Fury's style. However, at this moment, Rosen couldn't ascertain S.H.I.E.L.D's specific situation. This was also a drawback of the mechanical animals. Rosen could gain their vision, yes, but unless they were autonomously deployed, and he already knew their location, he couldn't determine their exact position. Not to mention that the target was currently on a plane. There wasn't even a landmark to help determine the location. Besides that, mechanical animals had another drawback. They could only see what was within their field of vision but couldn't hear sounds. So, he could see what Jessica and the agents were saying at the moment, but he couldn't know the content. However, one good thing was that Rosen could still control the mechanical animal's movements. So, the next second, Jessica, who was talking to Coulson inside the plane, felt the mechanical animal she had placed in her arms gently nudging her. She immediately understood that Rosen was contacting her. Immediately, while talking to Coulson with an unchanged expression, she casually reopened the mission briefing she had already read several times. This also meant that the contents of the mission briefing were exposed to Rosen's sight. And this was the most important reason Rosen had Jessica join S.H.I.E.L.D. intelligence. Although Rosen was a transmigrator familiar with the plot, that was only limited to the overall plot direction. He lacked more specific information, such as the exact dates of each event. As for other non-major event intelligence, it could be said he had none at all. The lack of intelligence was one of Rosen's biggest weaknesses at this stage. However, S.H.I.E.L.D., the world's top intelligence agency, had no shortage of such information. And after Jessica joined S.H.I.E.L.D., any intelligence she could access basically meant Rosen could access it. And that wasn't all. Jessica joining S.H.I.E.L.D. also served another purpose: internal personnel information within S.H.I.E.L.D. Later, when Rosen acquired the Scepter of Domination or activated the Dark Ranger's Talisman skill. Although important personnel like Phil Coulson couldn't be controlled, some secondary agents and internal staff could be fully controlled. Over time, Rosen could even subtly gain complete control of S.H.I.E.L.D., and perhaps even Hydra. Of course, these were all matters for the future. At this moment, after seeing the mission briefing, Rosen immediately understood the reason why Jessica, or rather S.H.I.E.L.D., had left Budapest. Because after the file was opened, the first thing Rosen saw was a photo of the flashy Tony Stark. Tony Stark had been kidnapped. And Jessica and their goal, needless to say, was to go to Afghanistan to rescue him. As for why Jessica was needed for the rescue, it was, of course, because she could fly. Although there were planes, how much commotion did a plane make when deployed? And now, learning of Stark's kidnapping, Rosen couldn't help but feel a sense of realization. Although he had long known this day would come, and had previously interacted with the older Captain America and secretly met important figures like Coulson, when this day truly arrived, he still felt a bit unreal. After all, the significance of Tony Stark's kidnapping was simply too great. The curtain is truly about to rise. Knowing that Tony Stark had been kidnapped, Rosen didn't rush to Afghanistan. Because it hadn't been long since Tony was kidnapped. He would be held in the cave for a full 3 months before escaping with the first generation of armor he hammered out. So Rosen had enough time to arrange everything before meeting the Iron Man who would save the entire universe in the future. What's more, Rosen wasn't S.H.I.E.L.D. or the military. As long as he had a relatively detailed map, he could find anyone in any corner of the Earth. Skill. See-through, level 1. In the game, its effect is to scout an area on the game map and detect invisible units, but the scouted area is limited to the surface. Underground, caves, and other internal environments cannot be probed. Duration 8 seconds, unlimited range, radius of effect 600 1800 4000, cooldown 1 minute. In reality, the effect is basically the same, and it also has an unlimited range. The only change is that if Rosen wants to scout an area, he must have a detailed map of that area. That is to say, if Rosen had detailed maps of other planets, he could also use this skill to scout. And obviously, getting a map of Afghanistan was not difficult. Of course, the more detailed, the better, preferably a military map. This matter could be left to Jessica. Since S.H.I.E.L.D. arranged for her to find someone, they couldn't possibly not give her a map. After getting the map, Rosen didn't need to search inch by inch according to the map, he just needed to find the valleys on the map and slowly try them, who made him watch the movie and know that Tony was imprisoned in a valley. Of course, it was also possible that the valley was not on the map, but this probability was very low. And even if such an unexpected situation did occur, Rosen could continue searching in other ways later, directly excluding the valley areas already marked on the map. Besides, if Tony Stark was rescued too early, without letting him suffer a bit, what if he didn't become Iron Man? So, with plenty of time, Rosen might as well go to the US-Mexico border first, get more illicit money to recharge the system, and draw more skills. Not to mention drawing all skills, but at least drawing a few heroes' skills to get their attribute overlays. As the curtain of the superhero era was drawn, the attributes of a mere level 1 the Watcher were not enough. So Rosen chose to use a town portal scroll immediately to return to New York. And after Jessica sent back a military map of Afghanistan, Rosen took the map and went to Texas for a trip. Along the way, Rosen naturally didn't forget to use his see-through skill to find Tony Stark's whereabouts. It turned out that not checking was fine, but after checking, Rosen realized he was still too young. It could only be said that it was indeed the legendary graveyard of empires. There were too many valleys. There were also too many armed resistance forces. Almost every valley with a slightly better environment suitable for human life had various resistance forces stationed there. Fortunately, Rosen still had a slight impression of the valley's appearance in the movie. And the 10 rings symbol was too obvious. Ultimately, Rosen identified 5 valley strongholds belonging to the 10 rings, whose environmental layout had some similarities to his impression. After marking these 5 valley locations on the map, Rosen informed Jessica to avoid these 5 points when searching. He didn't want Tony to be found prematurely because of Jessica's involvement. After all this, Rosen quietly crossed the border and plunged into this land, known as one of the most chaotic areas in the world. Compared to when he was in New York, where every action required collecting information about those gangs, sending out small animals and warhawks to investigate their stronghold locations, and a series of other preliminary tasks. He also had to consider official forces and so on. After arriving in northern Mexico, Rosen instantly let loose. Because the northern region of this country was almost entirely the domain of drug traffickers. Their military strength was far beyond what American gangs could compare to. They even dared to actively attack the military, not to mention the police. In this situation, Rosen didn't have to worry about any official forces at all. As for finding strongholds, it was even simpler. Wherever the Warhawks' gaze reached, those luxurious villas and estates guarded by a large number of armed personnel were basically correct. So, before long, Rosen, stepping with Gale step, arrived outside an extremely luxurious estate. It must be said that the drug lords of this country were indeed formidable. A luxurious estate, its outer defenses were arranged like a military camp. However, for Rosen, there was no difference. This time, Rosen did not adopt the previous method of secret infiltration. Without worries, he prepared to have some fun. Entering the estate, a small factory building appeared out of thin air. Goblin Tinkerer skill, Pocket Factory skill form. Because he didn't know how much he would gain this time, Rosen didn't bring a workbench or materials to avoid occupying too much system space. Anyway, ordinary humans, without a large army or heavy weapons like missiles, could basically not pose any threat to him. There was no need to consider issues like protracted battles either. The basic skill effects were enough to cope. The patrolling guards in the estate soon discovered this building and wanted to come and check it out. But the next second, several rockets fell, directly eliminating this team of guards. Goblin Tinkerer skill, Rocket Barrage. However, it wasn't over yet. Several dark energy beams shot out, and those corpses exploded, after which a beetle the size of a washbasin appeared, hissing and pouncing towards where human breath was detected. Skill from the Crypt Lord, Carrion Beetle. At the same time, a giant bear roared and appeared out of thin air, pouncing towards where people were. Skill from the neutral hero Beastmaster, Summon Bear. Then came two water elementals. Skill from the human hero Archmage, Summon Water Elemental. And after these summoned creatures appeared, the Pocket Factory also produced its first mechanical goblin, who laughed maniacally and charged towards the approaching guards. Actually, Rosen's regular mall also had things like the Rod of Necromancy, which could summon skeleton warriors. But that cost money, and unlike skill summons, it didn't last as long as there was mana supply. So, adhering to the principle of saving every bit, Rosen had never bought that thing. The military quality of the guards in this estate could be said to be not weak. Faced with the sudden attack, they quickly began to organize a counterattack. If it were ordinary military or police, dealing with them would likely result in considerable losses. But unfortunately, they encountered a group of non-human monsters. The summoned creatures seemed fragile in the game, but that was when facing enemies of the same magical level. In the real world, with their defensive capabilities, ordinary light firearms were completely useless. Only by using heavy machine guns and rockets could they cause some damage. And the guards of this estate indeed had these weapons. But the problem was that the number of these heavy weapons was not large. And even if one or two summoned creatures were occasionally killed, Rosen could immediately summon them again. Especially the Carrion Beetle. In the game, due to game balance limitations, the Crypt Lord could only summon 5 at a time. But in the real world, as long as there were corpses, it could be summoned without limit. However, this belonged to dark magic. In New York and London, Rosen didn't want to conflict with the mages of Kamar Taj, so he had never used it. But here, Rosen thought it wouldn't attract them. And with this level of summoning, even if he didn't use the Staff of Antonidas, his level 1 Brilliance Aura skill alone was enough to cope. Moreover, while summoning, Rosen was not idle. His original Night Blade was put away. In his hand, replacing it, was a longbow. A flash of fire. A guard was shot through the forehead with an arrow. The next second, the opponent's head exploded directly. Burning Arrow. This skill, from the Priestess of the Moon, was far more powerful than what was shown in the game. It was said to be an attached fire attack, but it looked entirely like an explosive arrow, with power no less than anti-materiel weapons of Barrett's caliber. And because it was a skill, Rosen didn't need to carry arrows with him like Hawkeye. The skill itself would condense a magic arrow. As for the 8 mana point consumption, it was negligible compared to its power. Immediately, Rosen drew his bow again, aiming at another guard who was frantically shooting at a water elemental. However, this time, what shot out was not an arrow with a fiery glow, but one with a faint blue light. The frost arrow from the Naga Sea Witch. The next second, the guard who was shot did not just suffer minor damage and have his attack and movement speed reduced, as targets in the game would. Instead, with the spread of a cold aura, he was completely frozen into an ice sculpture within a few short seconds. Then, a passing water elemental smashed him into a pile of ice shards. Of course, this doesn't necessarily mean the frost arrow's power was exceptionally great. It was mainly because ordinary humans have too low a resistance to cold. If it were shot at an Asgardian, Rosen believed its effect wouldn't be much stronger than in the game. And for frost giants like Loki, it would be even more negligible, likely completely immune. After trying out 2 ranged skills, Rosen put away his longbow and took out his moonglaive again. Then, with a blink, he charged directly into the guard's formation. The Watcher skill, Blade Storm, countless magical blades flew out, and enemies within a 40-meter radius of Rosen all perished. Another blink. Naga Sea Witch skill, Forked Lightning, enemies within a 60-meter radius were instantly charred by electricity, twitching as they fell to the ground. Shadow Strike, a poisoned blade, shot towards a Zero, hiding in a corner, attempting to backstab. Accompanied by a scream, this fellow directly turned into a pool of green pus, not even leaving a single bone. Rosen was not surprised by this, although he hadn't used this skill on people before. He had, however, experimented with it on animals. But even though this skill was terrifying, there was no need to worry about residual toxic pus causing any danger. Perhaps it was because the Night Elves were particularly environmentally conscious. In any case, the skill's toxic effect looked terrifying, but the residual poisoned water would decompose on its own after a few minutes, leaving no lasting pollution. It was also a good method for destroying bodies and evidence. Just as Rosen was continuously trying out various skills, the Warhawk, which had been circling in the sky, sent a message to Rosen. Some people in the manor were preparing to escape. There was no other way. Rosen summoned creatures and he himself displayed terrifying power. Although the guards in this manor were very crazy, after all, they were on drugs, and well trained. However, when facing an unbeatable enemy, they still showed a cowardly side. They chose to flee. Not to mention the leader and his family living in the main building. But within the Warhawk's surveillance range of over 80 kilometers, where could they escape to? A convoy consisting of 3 armored vehicles and 2 luxury cars drove out of the manor's back gate less than 100 meters. Rosen had already used Blink to intercept them in front. Seeing Rosen blocking the road, the machine gun on the leading armored vehicle immediately opened fire on him frantically. But unfortunately, facing the powerful protection of Rosen's blade armor, the dense gunfire had no effect except for kicking up sparks. However, the driver was also insane, flooring the accelerator and charging directly at Rosen, in a stance of mutual destruction. Facing the car charging at him, Rosen stood firm, waving his moonglaive. As expected of the Watcher's exclusive weapon, it was strong and sharp enough. It actually cut the armored vehicle, along with its machine gun and gunner, in half. Subsequently, the other vehicles were dealt with in the same manner. After he was done, a towering pillar of fire erupted. Under the flame storm, no bones remained. As for who was in the cars, Rosen didn't care at all. Because earlier, while wandering around the manor, Rosen had already discovered a warehouse storing a massive amount of flour, which he had already set ablaze. Anyone involved with this stuff was not innocent. Rosen then disappeared from his original spot again, and following the Warhawk's prompts, quickly intercepted and killed the rest of the people attempting to escape. Ultimately, within the entire luxurious manor, only wandering rotten corpse beetles remained, along with water elementals and giant bears serving as temporary guards. As for the bodies, they were either consumed by the summoned rotten corpse beetles or became their food. After returning to the manor, looking at the extravagant mansion before him, Rosen, who had completed a carnage, took a deep breath. Next, it was time for the jackpot. Under the search of a large number of rotten corpse beetles, Rosen soon found the manor's vault, collection room, and armory. At the same time, Rosen did not forget to order the rotten corpse beetles to collect other scattered valuables in the manor. Rosen first went to take a look at the armory. Seeing that it mostly contained ordinary firearms, he didn't pay much attention. After all, ordinary firearms were of no use to him. Next was the collection room. However, what was collected inside were mostly Western antiques, oil paintings, and the like, which Rosen didn't understand. So in the end, he only took some gold and silver utensils used for display, plus a few collector's guns. Especially a pair of golden desert eagles, which were very dazzling. Wade Wilson would definitely love these. If he ever had the chance to meet that guy in some universe, perhaps he could use these to hire him for a small job. Finally, the main event, the vault. When he saw the vault, with stacks of neat cash, gold bars filling wall cabinets, and sacks full of money haphazardly piled up. Even though Rosen was mentally prepared, he still couldn't help but swallow several times. How the heck is Kingpin, the U.S. King of the Underworld, doing? He's actually not making as much money as Rosen just casually finding a drug dealer here. Of course, Rosen was just casually complaining. It wasn't that Kingpin was really less wealthy than the drug dealers here. It's just that most of Kingpin's wealth had already been laundered and turned into various legitimate businesses. The rest was also distributed across the United States. Moreover, his influence was vast, and his expenses were also high. So, it was impossible for everything to be concentrated in the Fisk Tower. In comparison, these flower dealers were the ones with the most spare cash. Furthermore, it could be seen from the security setup of this manor. Rosen's randomly chosen robbery target was definitely nobody. After all, things like armored vehicles are not something a small force would possess. 763 million. This was the amount of US dollars Rosen harvested from the vault of the great drug lord's manor. And this was just US dollars. Besides that, there were also nearly 200 million pesos, about 100 million pounds and euros, and some miscellaneous South American currencies. Because unlike US dollars, which could be directly devoured by the system to get a specific number, Rosen could only estimate these currencies. After all, the quantity was too large, let alone counting them one by one. There were several cash counting machines directly in the vault, and it would take an unknown amount of time to count them with those machines. It could only be described as breathtaking. Then, thinking about the 1 or 200 million amounts reported in the news before he transmigrated. This was probably the figure released after most of it had been embezzled, right? As for why the US dollar was the most abundant currency, despite being in Mexico. Who made the US dollar the world currency? Who made the peso worthless? And the main sales target of these drug lords was the United States. Drug lords weren't fools, of course, they knew which currency was most beneficial to them. What else would they use if not the US dollar? However, this situation actually benefited Rosen. If these drug lords had only stored pesos, he would be the one with a headache now. The fact was, Rosen ultimately only took the pounds, euros, and other hard currencies. He didn't even spare a glance at the pesos and simply left them. Because unless he stayed in Mexico for a long time, such a large amount of pesos would be completely useless. As for exchanging them for US dollars or something, it would be time-consuming and laborious. With that time, Rosen might as well clear a few more places. Taking them along would purely occupy unnecessary system space. After all, besides cash, there was also over a ton of gold in the vault. Fortunately, they were all gold bars, which didn't need to occupy too much system space. And because they were all gold bars, with weight markings printed on them. So Rosen could roughly calculate the amount with a quick glance. After inventorying the general harvest, next came the most important lottery draw for Rosen. However, having learned from the lesson of being too impatient during the first draw. This time, Rosen didn't draw all at once, but one by one. To prevent the system's notification sounds from clashing in his mind. First draw. Congratulations, host, you have obtained the skill Blazing Arrow, current skill level 2. Second draw. Congratulations, host, you have obtained the skill Death Coil, current skill level 1. Third draw. Congratulations, host, you have obtained the skill Death Coil, current skill level 2. Fourth draw. Congratulations, host, you have obtained the skill Death Coil, current skill level 3 upgraded to max level, will no longer be drawn. Rosen, what kind of luck did he have? Was he really stuck with Death Coil? He had already drawn all of them, no big deal. Fifth draw. Congratulations, host, you have obtained the skill Unholy Aura, current level 1. 6th draw. Congratulations, host, you have obtained the skill Death Pact, current level 2. Rosen was dumbfounded. Was he really stuck with Death Knight? Rosen expressed his disbelief. System, 3 more draws. 7th draw. Congratulations, host, you have obtained the skill Holy Light spell, current skill level 1. 8th draw. Congratulations, host, you have obtained the skill Holy Light spell, current skill level 2. 9th draw. Congratulations, host, you have obtained the skill Devotion Aura, current skill level 1. For a moment, Rosen really wanted to laugh. This also proved that people really do laugh when they are speechless. After drawing Death Knight, he drew Paladin, right? 2 types of knights teamed up to fight him here. It wasn't that the skills of the 2 knight heroes weren't good. The key was that if they came consecutively, could they at least let him complete one hero first? He just wanted one hero's attribute overlay. Why was it so difficult? Rosen, having calmed down, chose to enter the bathroom and comfortably soaked in the luxurious bathtub that could accommodate dozens of people. Although the people in the manor had been completely cleared out, most of the basic facilities were not damaged and could still operate normally. After soaking for a while, Rosen began to draw again. First draw. Congratulations, host, you have obtained the skill Sleep, current skill level 1. Second draw. Congratulations, host, you have obtained the skill Frost Armor, current skill level 1. Third draw. Congratulations, host, you have obtained the skill Blink, current skill level 3, upgraded to max level, will no longer be drawn. I finally hit the jackpot. Seeing that he had drawn level 3 Blink, Rosen instantly became excited. At the same time, the system's notification sound rang out again. Congratulations, host, you have activated all basic skills of the hero the Watcher, and successfully activated the ultimate skill, Spirit of Vengeance. The host will receive the Watcher's complete form, level 10, attribute overlay. Hint. As the host already possesses a level 1 the Watcher template, you will not receive a second full attribute overlay. Change to attribute enhancement to the Watcher's complete form attributes. As the notification sound ended, Rosen's basic attributes, from the original Strength 18, Agility 20, Intelligence 15, became Strength 39, Agility 34, Intelligence 33. The improvement was undeniably significant. But, because of the Watcher template given earlier, he couldn't get a full attribute overlay. System, no, I protest. When the newbie gift package was issued, this point was not mentioned. It doesn't count. Rosen shouted in his mind. His response was the system's silence. It didn't even bother to respond to him. Fine, you're the system, you're awesome. Rosen, receiving no response, was very helpless. If the Watcher's attributes couldn't be stacked, then I'll draw other heroes, okay. I'm rich now. Draw again. Congratulations, host, you have obtained the skill Engineering upgrade, current skill level 3. Congratulations, host, you have obtained the skill Trueshot Aura, current skill level 1. Congratulations, host, you have obtained the skill Silence, current skill level 1. Congratulations, host, you have obtained the skill Summon Wild Boar, current skill level 1. Congratulations, host, you have obtained the skill Critical Strike, current skill level 1. Congratulations, host, you have obtained the skill Critical Strike, current skill level 2. However, just as Rosen was immersed in the pleasure of drawing and couldn't extricate himself, a warning came from the Warhawk that had been pre-warning in the sky. An army was approaching the manor. Although Rosen had thoroughly cleared out everyone in the manor, he hadn't cut off the manor's connection with the outside world during the previous battle. Evidently, subordinates from other parts of the Drug Lord's organization in the manor had received the news and were coming to rescue him. Rosen didn't take this seriously. Let them come, it was a good opportunity for him to try out his newly activated skills. It was also from this day that a terrifying dark legend, named Spirit of Vengeance, began to spread in the northern region of Mexico. Many witnessed countless dark female vengeful spirits slaughtering everyone in mansions and courtyards. Even armed helicopters, armored vehicles, and even tanks, these heavy firepower weapons, had no effect on those terrifying vengeful spirits. However, what made the Mexican people feel fortunate was that these terrifying vengeful spirits seemed to only target those drug lords who held significant power. And so, this spirit of vengeance was spread as a story of an innocent girl, tortured to death by a drug lord, returning from hell to earth for revenge. Thanks for watching.